I'm very happy and glad to have with me Dr. Negar. Doctor, I'm so delightful to have you here in an interview, actually, much awaited.
Thank you so much. I'm glad to be here and thank you for inviting me.
Yeah, I'm sure we are going to discuss a lot of subjects today that carry a lot of inspirations.
I hope so, certainly.
So, Doctor, let's start with your biography.
The difficult part always to start with,
Yeah.
because I always think when you talk about your past, it's easy to get into the stuff which are important for you personally, but not necessarily important. And you can overlook the parts which are actually playing a role,
Mm.
but you have taken them for granted. But I'll try to stick to a non-biased version for now. So I was born in 1973 in Tehran in a family that was originally from Kurdistan, Iran. My parents are both from Sanandaj, and as you might know, people in Kurdistan are very much into music. They practically live their life and death and everything in their lives with music. So I can say that I was born into a very musical family, but plus that my mother is also a musician, and she started very early when she started playing the violin, and later when we were children, my brother and I, she started studying at the University of Tehran, so she
Mhm.
was a student of music there, well, until the Islamic Revolution of 1979 changed everything. But
Mhm.
that's another story. My father was also, and is still, a music lover. He wasn't playing any instrument, but he was also very passionately following all the musicians and all the good stuff. And I was lucky, I would say, to have a variety of musics around. I mean, we would have Western classical music to listen to. We would have the very traditional classical Persian music around, and mostly because my parents were also into it, we could kind of have access to the highest quality, if I can call it that.
Mm.
And then because my mother was a musician, we also had musician friends around. So I would say everything was encouraging,
Mhm.
but despite that, and although my mother sent me to classes to start playing santur, the
Mm.
Persian dulcimer, when I was 8 years old. Yeah, I was 8. And
Mm.
actually, my teacher was the master, Parviz Meshkatian.
Oh.
But for some reason, or maybe because my brother was also playing the santur, he's also a musician and a composer. And he was playing it with Faramars Paivar, the other Ustad in Persian classical music. So I kind of thought that, okay, one is enough. He's playing it.
Mm.
Why would I have to
Mm.
go for that? And I didn't take it that seriously. And it was a bit later, when I was a teenager, that I played a bit of setar, very, very basic stuff.
Mhm.
But at that time, I was more into Persian poetry. I spent most of my time reading whatever I could find in Persian classical literature, especially poetry.
Interesting.
And yeah, that was an important thing happening in my whole life as an artist, I would say.
Mhm.
And of course, it gave me a lot of ideas about the past, the history of Sufism, all the heritage that the East is making its ideology of philosophy and ideology upon.
Mhm.
Anyway, that setar playing was not taken seriously either, and it took me another couple of years till I was 18 years old to suddenly fall in love with the oud. I remember the moment very vividly where I was captured practically. I was mesmerized by the sound of oud coming out of the loudspeaker at my parents' place. I practically sat in front of the loudspeaker, paralyzed, listening to the sound of the instrument. It was Abdul Wahab Shahidi, who was more famous for his singing, but he also played the oud.
Uh-huh.
And from that moment on, I was like, oh, this is what I have to do. This is my life. I could feel my heart drop with every note, with every sound I could hear from the oud.
Mhm.
And I insisted that I wanted to play the instrument. My father was like, oh, there are so many instruments in this house, and you want to play the only one that we don't have.
Oh, not even copying your mother and going for a violin.
No, my mother actually tried to convince me to play the violin for a while, and she taught me how to hold it.
Mm.
She even took me once to the master she had played with, Ali Tajbidi, who
Oh,
was a pupil of Abul Hassan Sabah. You might have
yes.
known about that,
Yeah.
of course.
Mm.
And I remember that as a teenager, I was at Ustad Tajvidi's house and I held the violin. And he looked at me and said, well, nicely done, and asked my mother if she had taught me. And my mother
Mm.
proudly said, yes, a bit. Well, but she wasn't happy with me because I wasn't practicing.
Mm.
And then nicely, very, very kindly, Ustad Tajvidi asked me to sing something.
Mhm.
Before that, sorry, I missed one part. Before that, he asked me if I could recognize Persian classical dastgahs, if I could tell what chargah is in comparison to shur or mahur. And I said, yes, I can a bit. And while I was talking, of course, I was also shy and being polite, not speaking that much. Saying only a couple of words, he said, nice voice.
Mhm.
With only a few words, he recognized that I had a voice which could be used for singing.
Yeah.
And then at the violin, my mother said, well, she's not really practicing. And Ustad Tajwidi was just fine that maybe it's not hers. And it was actually him who later led me to Mansour Nariman, who became my Ustad in playing the oud and the Dasgah stuff on the oud. But that's a
Mhm.
bit late. That comes a bit later. So you asked why I didn't pursue my mother's instrument, and
Yes,
that.
yes.
Well, in those years, it wasn't that easy to find oud in Tehran. As you might know, there was a kind of blackout in the history of the instrument in Iran.
Mhm.
We can talk about that later if you like.
Sure.
Uh, it was a bit difficult to find the instrument, and it was also not that easy to find a teacher to teach you how to play the oud because there were not so many oud players, and this would be when I was 18, so it's not that long ago, like 30 years ago or so.
Mhm.
And well, we needed some help to find the instrument, but fortunately, through the friends of my mother's and the classmates at the university when they were students, there was a very, very nice musician, kind woman who had played the oud both
Mm.
at the conservatory and then at the university. And we went there. I had the chance to hold her instrument and loved it still. And she suggested where to go to look for some possibilities. And we went to a shop. There was this Baharestan Square, which a lot of shops were selling instruments.
Mhm.
We went to one of them and we asked the shopkeeper for an oud. And he brought one which was uh, very decorated. It was, I think, originally from Egypt, if I'm not mistaken, or he presented it as an Egyptian oud. And
Mm.
it had these mother of pearls decoration and so on. And he kept insisting that this is a good instrument and I should buy it. And he played some
Mm.
mizrabs on it.
Mhm.
But I suddenly saw another one hanging up there on the left, and it caught my eye, and I said, what about that one? I think I need to check that.
Mm.
And the shopkeeper looked at me and said, well, but this one is nicer, are you sure? And I said, no, I want that one, I want to see it. So
Mm.
he brought it down and I fell in love with it and we bought it. It wasn't that expensive, it was just like normal price, around the average.
Mm.
And afterwards I realized when I went to the teacher that this was actually a very good instrument
Mhm.
from Nariman Abnusi. Nariman Abnusi was the reviver of the oud making in Iran
Mm,
about like 60 years ago or so. He was the one who my teacher, Mansour Nariman, had ordered or had commissioned to make an oud, and with the help of some people, they could manage to find another instrument through which he could find a design and make an oud for Mansour Nariman. By the way, this similarity in name might confuse people.
yeah.
Mansour Nariman's real name was Iskandar Ibrahimi, but he chose Nariman as an artistic name after Nariman Abnusi, who was the luthier who made him the
Uh-huh.
oud,
Mm,
and they were very close friends for decades.
mm,
Anyway, so it was just like love at the first sight, and it became to be true. And fortunately, afterwards, I could find Hossein Behrouzinia, the oud player who had studied with Mansour Nariman, and I started with him. But then, after a couple of months, through Ustad Tajvidi, I could go to Mansour Nariman and play for him,
mm,
and he encouraged me a lot, and he was very kind and suggested that I continue with him, which was, I think, very good for me. He was an absolutely wonderful teacher. I mean, apart from being a great musician, he was also a very good teacher.
mhm,
And from that point on, music got bigger and bigger in my life. It took a bigger part of everything,
mm,
of my daily life, of my social life, of my relationships with other people. Everything went in the direction of music. By the way, in the meantime, I finished high school and took the big exam, which we call concours in
mm,
Iran. And because I realized that I wanted to be in the world of arts then, but I didn't think I would be a musician at that time. I just thought I'm in love with the oud and I'm playing it because I love it. So I went to study architecture at the University of Tehran, and the Department of Architecture is also in the Faculty of Fine Arts, and the Department of Music is just a few meters away. So, studying architecture there, I was also neighboring with the Department of Music, and you can guess what happened afterwards. I was
mhm,
spending more and more time in the Department of Music, and so it went on. I joined ensembles. I learned more and more. Then we gave concerts and I joined recordings. And after a while, I was recognized as well,
mhm,
what you can call a serious oud player.
mhm,
And that was it. Then I decided to leave architecture
mm,
and devote my life to the oud and to music. Well, it's just, I love it. It's not that I made a decision. I
mhm.
think music and oud made the decision for my life, not the other way around.
Yeah, but you got
And
a degree, doctor, in architecture,
yes,
right?
I did the Masters of Architecture, but what I did, which was also very I can't say it was wise because there again, I didn't make a conscious choice. But what happened was that in the Department of Music, we had a professor, Dr. Khosrow Maulana, who was an acoustician who was also into musical acoustics. And
Yes.
he had a great knowledge about old treatises of Safieddin Ormavi, Abdul Qadir Maraghi, Farabi, Ibn Sina, and all those old stuff he was presenting in his classes.
Hmm.
And I learned all those stuff with him. And I took the chance to do my final project for the Master of Architecture under his supervision, designing a conservatory with the rooms needed to perform Persian music, either for practicing or for performance as a school. So I
Interesting.
finished my architecture, but I kind of switched in
Mm.
between.
Yeah, I think we will stop and talk about the conservatory project. But let
Okay,
me go back to the learning process now. Your
please.
mother is a grand student of Abul Hassan Saba, a student of Ali Tajweedi,
True.
and that for sure had an impact on you and your brother. At the same
Certainly.
time, you studied Santur. I don't know how. What is the learning process? What is the culture of that kind of studying at the time before being so serious with Dawood? and then studying with the other oud teachers or ustads.
Hmm.
Nariman is one. So let's just look into these, starting from the earlier ones. I mean, the learning process itself.
Hmm. I think the role my mother played there is really huge, partly consciously, partly just automatically, in the sense that we were exposed to a lot of good stuff. I remember once, you might have heard of something called Jashn Honar Shiraz. In Shiraz, before the Islamic Revolution, for a couple of years, there was a big festival of arts with all different kinds of arts, of course, including music. They had Iranian music from the Dastgah ones or the regional ones from different parts of the country. They also invited a lot of musicians from other cultures, like from Far East or from Western countries. And there are a collection of very good performances of Persian classical music, like Shajarian and Lotfi and Paivar, Bahari, Shahnaz, all of them performed in Shiraz. Most of them were actually very nicely situated in the tomb of Hafiz Shirazi, the most loved Persian poet.
Yeah.
And I remember that once, although we were children, my brother Babak and I, my family decided to travel because they were so enthusiastic to be there to take part in the concerts. And during the whole festival, we were in Shiraz. Of course, the children were not allowed, we were very little. But my parents would take turns, one at a time. One would go for one concert, the other one would take care of us. And then it came to the performance of Ustad Shajarian with the ensemble of Ustad Lotfi.
Hmm.
And they couldn't say who can go. So, because at that time there was also a family relationship between us and Shajarian's family, we became family friends.
Uh-huh.
The master himself, as a joke, had suggested that he will take care of us while my parents would go to the concert. So I'm giving you this story to show that when music is taken that seriously, of course it will leave a very deep impact on the children. We, my brother and I, never took music as something to be entertained with on the side,
Yeah.
to pass time with. It was taken as the food for soul,
Hmm.
something that you really need if you want to live a fuller life, if you want to fulfill your inner self with
Hmm.
the highest possible thoughts and emotions. And of course, good music mattered a lot. And
Yeah.
my mother still is in love with all the works of Sabah
Mm.
and his whole career. And we would listen to her play Sabah's work, his
Hmm.
pieces, his radif and stuff. So I think the education had started long before I was conscious about it.
Hmm.
But of course, afterwards, when Babak was going to take lessons with Ustad Paivar, Faramars Paivar was also a pupil of Sabah, but in Santur.
Hmm.
When Babak started playing the santur, maybe my mother thought that, okay, then let Negar have a chance as well. Maybe she likes it too, or maybe my mother just thought that she should be fair and give both children a chance. But I still have that feeling. The sound range of treble doesn't suit me, doesn't suit my whole system that
Hmm.
much.
Hmm.
Uh, I even made the joke that how can you play the violin with this E string, with the string of me's, so close to your left ear, and even do it in the lower positions, because it's even more and more treble, like
Yeah.
it's very
Shred.
high.
Yeah.
So the metal strings as well on Santur was producing a lot of course, higher overtones. And I think, although I wouldn't be able to express this as I can now, then I had a feeling that this is not mine.
Hmm.
I was enjoying my brother playing it. I was following his practicings and rehearsals for whatever he was doing. But I wasn't feeling like this is mine to do.
Mhm.
But I'm sure I was learning a lot. I still remember that the first time I took part in a jury when I became a teacher at the conservatory and at the university when we were holding exams, I actually relied a lot when we were asking santur players
Mhm.
or kamanche players who were doing the repertoire, which was not for the oud, but I had the knowledge from all the sabah repertoire to ask them or comment on their work.
Mhm.
Uh, uh, Again, I'm trying to give an image of how an overall journey can be formed by being exposed to something, although
Yeah.
you are not directly taking lessons.
Mhm.
And I think my ears were more and more familiar with the content of Persian music year by year.
Mhm.
Uh, Although still I wasn't that conscious about it. So when we went to Ustad Tajvidi's house and he asked me if I could tell uh, something from another, like Chargah from Mahur, which are taken to be quite distinct from one
Mhm.
another, I could be rather confident with saying, yes, I think I can. And with the songs that Ostad Tajvidi himself had composed, which were taking, they were not too complicated to follow,
Mhm.
like the ones that Marzieh and Delkesh had sung. They were quite, they looked simple,
Mhm.
they were easy to follow, and they had the content of the Persian Dastgah system in them.
Mhm.
So it was for everybody, not just for me. It was easy to sing them.
Mhm.
And through my mother's practices and notation of Ostad Tajridi's work and such things, I was also exposed to them.
Mhm.
So I can say that when I started playing the oud, it was as if I had accumulated a lot of stuff already,
Mhm.
and it was just getting it uh, in the instrument
Mhm.
to put it into practice. But after that, um, I think what Ostad Nariman, my teacher Mansour Nariman, did was that he was a very kind-hearted
Mhm.
and observant teacher who would never treat two students the same. He would always notice what you can do better and what you need in the moment to develop your skills. So
Mhm.
he would always bring in stuff that every student one by one would need, and I think that was also very effective. He wouldn't try to make like a factory to make every student the same, and that was a very well seen in all his students. We are not the same at all. We are at least three of us were studying at the same time with him. Ali Pajouheshkar and Shahram Gholami and I, we
Mhm.
were around the same time. And Mansour Nariman actually encouraged us to be a bit competitive with each other because he thought if we follow each other's work, we would be more encouraged, maybe, I don't know.
Interesting.
But at the same time, he never wanted us to be the same. So he took us as individuals who would have different feelings and different paths to take. And I also witnessed him giving different repertoire to different people because of what they needed in the moment to develop and feel more related to the instrument and what they would play. And I think that is an excellent teaching. If you want to make a person more musical, uh, certainly you have to put them in a context where they feel more themselves, not just copy or imitate their teacher without understanding it or without relating to it.
Interesting. Interesting.
And
Thanks, Negar, really, for taking us into this very close, observed process of learning, really.
oh, you're
And
welcome.
yeah, and the middle you were, you said you went to the Sun tour for
Mhm.
learning. How was that having anything to tell in this
Ah,
context?
that was quite short. That's why I usually skip
Mm,
it.
mm,
There is a book for beginners. It's called
mm,
Dastur Santur.
mhm,
That was written by Faramars Paivar, the ustad that my brother Babak was learning with.
mm,
And at that time, I went to a very interesting and important institute for learning music called Chavush. That is the institute where Mohammad Reza Lotfi, Hossein Alizadeh, Parviz Meshkatian were all teaching, and they were actively working with each other.
mm,
And so I went to Meshkatian's classes, but and I think I played about half of the beginner's book, half of this Dastur Santur.
mm,
According to my teacher, I was good. I was
mm,
doing my lessons well, and I, again, according to him, telling my mother that I was talented and
mhm,
I should be encouraged to do it more. But I didn't feel at home that much. I should tell you that the context as well. The whole room, in the
mm,
eye of an 8-year-old girl, was filled with big men. I didn't see any other children or girls around my age in that class, and they were all sitting around the same room, playing their homeworks one by one for the teacher to be corrected, and then have a new lesson. And that to me felt a bit like how to call it. I didn't feel anything special for me. It was just like, okay, I was given a task and I would try to do it well. And then the next session, another task, and I would do it and again and again. But I didn't feel connected to it in the sense that I would keep it for myself.
mhm,
I'm sure I had some souvenirs of those times without knowing. But it wasn't the best context for an 8-year-old girl, at least for me, for the type of character that I
mhm,
guess I was. I was more into um, fantasies, maybe. And that
mhm,
classroom was just like an office or
mhm,
something. It was all gray in my
mhm,
mind. It wasn't colorful.
mhm,
So it didn't make that much impact,
mhm.
although I was taken as a successful student.
Yeah.
So I left it without any, I mean, I didn't insist on going anymore. And I guess my mother realized, and then I didn't practice anymore. And then we stopped that.
Till the moment of going to the other kind of
No, no, no. There
contrast.
was there was quite a big gap in between. I
Mhm,
mean, I did the Santur lessons for less than a year.
mhm,
And then I played a bit of sitar when I was 13 or 14 years old. So there was a gap of some years in between trying santur and then trying sitar.
mhm.
So I just left it without continuing. But I don't think it was a bad experience. It was just an experience.
It is an experience, yes.
That's it.
Then Dawood called, and then
That's it.
I think we need to talk about the moment of turning into a professional.
Is there a moment?
Yeah, is it a moment or is it what?
I always actually have a problem with the word professional, and we had actually discussed that with a couple of colleagues a couple of years ago to come to some sort of definition of what you take as a professional. Some ideas are, of course, seeing it. I mean, from one point of view, you can see that as how you make your living.
Yeah.
If that is the point, well, I can say that I was taken as I mean, I took this as my profession in that sense when I started teaching.
Mhm,
Before that, I was joining ensembles to play and perform with them, but I know a lot of others who would do that as students
mhm,
by the way, it would be nice to add that one of the things that I loved about Mansour Nariman in his process of teaching was that uh, he would see that we join any possible activity that would help our journey with music. He would never
mhm,
say that you have to wait till you become an ostad to do a concert or whatever.
Mm,
So in the proper time that he would think, okay, you are ready enough for the next big challenge,
mhm.
not a small one, but a next big one actually.
Yeah.
He would introduce us to other people, like to an ensemble to join to play the stuff with them, or to a big orchestra actually to try to take a role of an oud player there, or to an institute to teach.
Mhm,
I remember that when he wrote a letter to me, I mean, for me to take with me as a recommendation, an introduction to one of the very good institutes in Tehran that was a reference for
mhm,
Persian classical music to learn at. I still had a copy because I gave the original, of course, to the person who was running the institute, but I kept a copy for myself. And when I read it, and saw how early that could have been. I mean, was I personally ready to write such a letter for a student who had learned with me for 3, 4 years?
mhm.
That would be really important to check, because I think what Mansour Nariman was doing was practically checking if the next generation had enough opportunity to
Mm.
to explore and grow.
Yeah.
And this was a big opportunity for me to have.
Mhm.
If I had another kind of ustad or teacher who wouldn't do that, it would have delayed my whatever you take as professional life,
Yeah,
certainly.
with all definitions of professional.
Yeah, absolutely. And if I
Yeah.
take my professional life starting with teaching, that was also how he, Mansour Nariman,
Mm,
pushed me. Like he said, okay, I think you are rather ready to take the challenge
mhm.
and ask me whenever you have any questions.
Interesting.
And yeah, he practically put any of us who was serious enough into the place of a prodigy, as the English would say,
Mm,
and demand more work in a
mhm.
very kind and soft way without making it look frightening or anything. And so if I take that definition of profession, yeah, that started with teaching alongside performing, first with
Interesting.
ensembles and then a bit later doing small solos
Mm,
in concerts, and then later, of course, radio
mm,
programs. That was also actually recommended by Mansour Nariman himself. He took us once, me and a classmate of mine, to a radio program to speak about our
mm,
experiences and perform a bit
mm.
and so on.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Interesting. Later on, we will talk about oud in Iran. But I
Okay,
think in this context, I should have asked you a question. Wasn't
please.
wasn't there a challenge that Mansour or Nariman, uh, I mean, trying to promote oud at this time, you know? I mean, how do you convince an ensemble to take oud players or
Mhm.
maybe do some solos and so on, which is not a popular instrument maybe by then?
Um, By the time I was playing it, actually, oud was welcome in ensembles with the role of playing the what they call bass line, which
Mm,
is not really that bass. It's semi-bass, baritone kind of range.
mm,
But at that time, it was considered, which I think could be a good thing in the sense of it provided oud players, which were not many, with many opportunities then, because there were many ensembles who would require a bit of a lower range instrument
mm,
alongside santur, tar, setar, kamanche, which are all in the higher range.
mm,
But the difficult part of it, the challenging part, was that when you face an ensemble with so many high register instruments and you're only one, one oud, which is not generally that loud,
mhm,
and they keep pushing you for being louder, it can become a bit risky if you still have the right sound on your instrument alone, or if you can produce the right intonation. I remember once watching a performance of some of my friends a bit younger than I am. And the oud player had unconsciously taken a very cute, um, shall I call it, trick as a habit. And that was that she was playing every note a bit sharper than the others,
Mm.
which would be taken as out of tune, right?
Yeah.
But because it was a bit sharper, it wouldn't drown, it wouldn't merge into the sound of the other instruments, and it would stand out. So she had somehow found this trick to make the oud be heard by the audience, while in the other examples, if you I personally always wanted emergent sounds. I wanted to have the sound of my oud drown in the sound of the other instruments, because I thought that was the aim of playing with the others as an ensemble. But that would always end up in, we can't hear the oud really. Can you be a bit louder? And for a while, every learner would get into trouble of pushing the instrument too hard. And so that is quite a challenge. But at that time, playing in ensembles was actually quite a demand. And I think Mansour Nariman was very uh, cleverly using that chance
Mhm.
to allow us into the real world of the work.
Mhm.
That was actually good. Nowadays, everybody, of course, every ensemble is asking for oud players. There's no doubt about that. The new challenge is to show that the oud is capable of solo performances as much as the other instruments,
Mhm.
which has been done for a couple of years now, of course, but it's more recent than the other one.
Thanks to you.
Thanks to many of my colleagues, it's not just me.
Great. Negar, let's go now to the higher studies and the project of the conservatory.
Okay.
Mm.
Well, when I was learning from what Khosrow Molana, PhD in acoustics, teaching both in our architecture department and in the department of music, I realized that I wanted to see why most of the rooms, being a hall, a concert hall, or being a practice room at the Department of Music, why are these halls making us feel better or worse about the sounds of our instrument? Some
Mhm.
of them would be better for practicing, so when we wanted to rehearse with our ensembles. Some would sound awful. In some, I would feel better to do the rehearsals, and so on and so forth. So I thought this would be a great chance to learn in in a project. I mean, I took I am in this habit actually to take projects as an excuse to get a real experience of something, to understand things and learn them.
Mhm.
And at the Faculty of Fine Arts, University of Tehran, for getting your master's degree in architecture, you had to do some design, not to do it as a building necessarily. I mean, you could find somebody who might promise you a budget so that it might be built later, but that was not the role the university was playing there. So it was only the design that was the question. So I talked with Dr. Molana and asked him about this. He took a bit of time, but he knew me from the classes and he had seen me perform on the oud as well. And he accepted. So I took the lessons further and I started the design. Uh, it wasn't that complicated because the information about architectural acoustics was present, I mean, in the world. The
Mhm.
only part missing was how we wanted the Persian instruments or the Iranian instruments to sit there, because the sounds were different. For example, when you want to have a string ensemble in the sense of Western music,
Mhm.
you know what sound you're encountering, so you can actually use the experience of designs in the world for such spaces
Mhm.
and make a new version of them,
Mhm.
so to speak. But for Persian classical music and the instruments we have, like santur, tar, tombak, oud, and kamanche, ney, and those instruments. We didn't even have an image of what the sound is averagely like. I mean, what kind of room are we looking for?
Mhm.
So we took the first step by looking at the range, like what frequency range we are dealing with. And then the rest was like finding the right size in the sense that if you have a too small room, it will break the lower registers and the energy will be lost. And then adding to that would be the material you will need in the room to find not too dry a room, but not too reverberant, because if you have a lot of reflections, then the sound will be muddy and not clear, and such details. And
Mhm.
then for the concert hall, I had to design two concert rooms, one for solo performance and one for group performance. There, I also did a survey among musicians and music lovers. I made a questionnaire and asked them many different questions to find what image people were looking for. What would they find uh, closer to the nature of the experience? Like, let me give you an example. In Iran, unfortunately, because the other topic we might like to talk about, because of the limitations the Islamic Republic has put on music,
Mm.
the public concert rooms were not really prepared for concerts. I mean, there are a lot of people who want to watch, for example, a concert by Hossein Alizadeh,
Mm.
but the spaces he can hold concerts in are either too reverberant, like when he plucks the tar once, you hear like an explosion, or too dry, or different spots in the room might sound different. Like there is this rather big concert hall. Well, it was originally made for party gatherings before this Islamic Republic came to power, but then they changed the function and they held concerts in. That is awful in sound. So the poor musician performing there would always have to worry if he would be heard as he wanted. I'm sure you know the problem from
Mhm.
experience yourself too. That when you are performing, if you really are a musician, you are looking for creating something with the sound, right? It's
Yeah.
not just that you play your own stuff and you are either heard or not. I mean, it's
Yes.
like I'm saying something. Can you hear me? But
Mhm.
if I'm just sending a message as a Morse code is one thing, and when I'm doing something in the artistic sense, I want to be using all the possibilities of my expression. Let's compare it with talking. If I do a theater performance,
Mm.
and my role demands a wide range of dynamics. I
Mhm.
need to whisper at some point and I need to shout at some point. So, would the room provide me with such situation where everybody can hear me when I whisper and everybody can still hear me well when I shout and when I'm kind and when I'm angry? And all these expressions are expressions of sounds, right?
Interesting.
And what if one point is blind? One point in the room can't hear me, and the other point, the other seat can hear me too loud. That's also part of the game. So if you do a design for any room to listen to some activity of sound,
Mhm.
either music or theater performance,
Mm.
even a lecture,
Mm.
you need to provide the space with the suitable sound, which ideally would be rather unified in different parts. Like you ideally would dream of a room in which you can sit anywhere and have a safe
Mm.
perception
Mm. Same
of the
quality.
sound.
Yeah.
But on top of that, as an architect, you would also like to provide a space in which people would feel connected, not just see the performer and hear the performer, but would also feel connected. As another example, again, in that hall, I was giving you the sound example of which was awful for a performance of Hossein Alizadeh, for example.
Yeah.
Uh, you would feel drowned. You could see all the audience. It was a huge hall. Well, huge is a bit too big. Is a bit too exaggerated for that. But you could see the whole 3,000 people, and you would feel drowned in that crowd in comparison to the performer who would look too small on the stage from where you were sitting.
Hmm.
And in architectural design, of course, this matters. You need to feel connected with the stage. Of course, they will try to make up for that with screens that would show the live performance and the face of the performer and so on and so forth. But that is practically originally designed for pop and rock music, not for music that needs a bit of an introvert or an inner side of
Hmm.
your soul being involved. Am I
Interesting.
going too far in
No, no,
architectural explanation?
no. Actually, it looks like deciding to go for architecture in the beginning was not a waste of time. It was
Not at
adding.
all, I would say.
Yeah. Interesting. So, how does that
Yeah, it
relate
gave.
to Al Armawi and Maraghi and Al Farabi that you mentioned earlier about this project?
Ah, very good question. Before Ormavi and Farabi and Maraghi, I would like to say something a bit more general as a souvenir of my years of studying architecture. And that is that
Mm,
through learning the idea of space and design, which generally I can define as you have some elements. It can be in open space, like trees and fountains and paths to walk through and whatever,
yeah.
and lighting and all these elements. And indoors, it could be walls and floors and ceilings and windows and such things. So you have some elements. In architecture, you would use those elements to create a space within which people would be going, sitting, sleeping, whatever activities you're suggesting.
Hmm.
In music, my understanding is that you are using other elements, which are generally taken as sound and silence, designing something or making something which would provide people with some sort of space, but from the inside. I'm sure everybody has experienced this feeling that you go to a building and you feel very tense.
Hmm.
And when you go out, you say, ah, I'm relieved.
Hmm.
What is practically doing that to you? It's either the colors or the sizes, the proportions of the walls and staircases and the material, whatever is happening there as what the the architects would call the design of the space, right? In music, you can do the same, but with the elements of sound.
Hmm.
So this, I think, gave me a very, very good understanding of another perspective of music, which made me look for the elements.
Hmm.
I mean, like, it's not just learning a melody and playing it on the instrument or singing it, but it's like looking for, okay, what elements do I have here to create something with?
Hmm.
And there, of course, if I add my general curiosity, which you can categorize under scientific questions sometimes, like in the sense of science in general, like you have questions you want answers for.
Yeah.
Uh, I encountered these old material from Ormavi, Maraghi, and Farabi, who were seriously taking the material of music as the ingredients.
Mm.
They all start with, okay, what do we have as elements? They introduce the notes, the tones, sorry, the tones as they call nagme,
Hmm.
nagma in Arabic, I guess,
Yes.
the
Yeah.
tones as they are produced. And then they talk about the relationship between these tones, which ones are pleasant and acceptable, which ones aren't, or further. So they even categorize the best matching, the secondary matching, and the third group. And then they even say that the first matching are the ones you can play together. The second one is okay if you play together or if you play in a sequence. The
Hmm.
third group will sound awful if you play together, but they will sound nice if you play in a row. You see what approach they
Interesting.
have. It's not in the sense of theory that is presented these days as a passive thing. I think the music theory has become more something of a user's manual to read and write
Yeah.
stuff that is already done.
Mm.
But in the old treatises of Ormavi and the others, they are giving you the material and an understanding of the material that you are supposed to work with later.
Mhm.
It's not about how to read and write the stuff that is already done for some reason that you are not supposed to know. You see,
Interesting.
I was teaching musical acoustics at the university for many years. That's another stage of my career, if we want to talk about. But the question of asking people, actually, do you know why you have these keys on the piano? I would always start, what do you think theory is? And they would say, well, the theory of music is knowing that we have do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, si, do, and there are some flats and sharp notes, bemol and diez, and then this is this, and then we write it like this, and these are the scales, blah, blah. And then if I ask them, okay, why 12? Let's go to the first stage,
Yeah.
the very first step you were talking about. Why do you have these keys only? Can we have more? Can we have less? And they had no clue. While in the so-called old stuff, especially from Safiuddin Ormavi onwards, which in Farsi and Arabic we call Maktab Montazamiye, the English name for that is scholastic school. Sorry, systematist school. Scholastic is Farabi and Ibn Sina. In the systematist, which means they have a system, they really go through a system. They first introduced you the tones, then they introduced you the relationship between the tones,
Yes.
and then they introduce mulayamat, meaning what would sound nice together in a general sense of consonants to go in a maqam, and what are the four main things to avoid. They call it tanafur.
Hmm.
Like, don't put them in this order. This will sound bad. And
Yes.
then they make maqams. Well, first ajnas and then the davayer, as Safiuddin called them, which will make maqams, and then so on and so forth. And then they introduce the irat, and then they tell you, okay, you have all the ingredients. Good luck.
Yes.
Go and create what you want. And I think this is an incredible approach in linguistics. Um, we accept that. I mean, we have it and we work with it
Hmm.
in language and linguistics both. And we even have this kind of this attitude that you believe you have something which upon which you can build on.
Mm.
But the current idea of theory, I think, is not that productive, that constructive in this sense. I think the older one was better. And I had the chance to learn it very well in the deeper sense with the critical approach, actually, not just accepting it, but also criticize it and review it and go over the loopholes and the parts that were not that clear and so on and so forth with Dr. Molana.
Uh-huh. Interesting. That must be a great experience to maybe detail further with you in
Yes,
another
certainly.
occasion. Yeah. Uh,
If there is enough time and
yeah.
interest, I would
Yeah.
be
I
glad to.
mean, this is really a very interesting time and a project to discuss further.
Certainly.
Nigar, now you migrated from architecture to music, and you studied the musicology after being a musician.
Yes,
These are
true.
two important things to at least touch upon.
That's true.
Mm,
Uh, After finishing my architecture studies, after doing my master's project, because I had already learned a lot with Dr. Maulana, and I was good at teaching already because I was doing a lot of teaching, I was invited to teach some courses at the university. And then it was actually again, I owe a lot to all of my teachers. It was Dr. Molana who introduced me to teach that stuff here and there, and he pushed me
mm,
to go for a PhD
mhm,
because he thought with the way I'm going, I would need a PhD degree. I wasn't that much into it, to be honest. I thought, okay, I'm done with the university. I have a lot of other stuff to do. I need to do my music. I need to get deeper in details of this and that. But he seriously pushed me in that direction. And at that time, there was a program introduced at different universities. It was generally called art studies or art research,
mm,
through which you could have some general lessons about art history, criticism, cognition, and such things. There are different styles in arts, different schools, and I mean, general knowledge about art and things around it. But you could do your own research in the field that you wanted.
mhm,
So I think it was after five, with a gap of 5 years after I had finished my architecture times, that I was accepted at the University of Al Zahra, it's called, in Tehran, for
mm,
a PhD program. And there we were seven classmates. Each of us was coming from a different discipline. One was coming from civil engineering, one was coming from architecture, one was coming from graphic design, one was a sculptor, the other one was a writer. So we were from different fields, and every one of us was doing their own stuff.
mhm,
We shared the same class for general knowledge, I would say, but even the research we were doing for every course was up to ourselves. So there I focused on music and the research that I was more interested in.
mhm,
And at the same time, I was having a contract at the Faculty of Radio and Television with a team, of course, not alone, that was supposed to design a full course, a full program of courses for
mm,
musical acoustics. Well,
mhm,
generally for acoustics, but a part of it was for musical acoustics. And then again, Dr. Molana pushed me to go further into the discipline that would relate the acoustics of speech and music.
mhm,
Like I would need to learn more about linguistics and phonetics, which are the sound aspects of language,
mhm,
to be able to relate it to musical acoustics.
mm,
And that triggered a very old question I always had. Uh, the question, two basic questions I had. One was that how do you uh, grade or how can you gradually go from speech to music?
mm,
Like, what is the borderline? How can I talk and just like slightly and slightly and slightly get into some sort of music? I mean, I can play upon my speaking and
mm,
get closer to music and fall into it or not. And everybody is familiar with that. And that was a very old question of mine, actually.
mhm,
And the other question I had was through my teachings, I had a very dear friend who was learning the oud and Persian music with me. She's an American.
mhm,
And when she was playing the stuff, whenever we were doing a metered piece with beat and pulsation and everything, it was okay.
mhm,
But as soon as we wanted to switch to something which we call avazi, a free rhythm part that had no beat and no pulsation, she was lost. And I would tell her to imitate me, but it wouldn't work,
mhm,
although she was speaking a bit of Persian. So I tried to check different things, and actually, I'm quite an observer at most of topics, in most of topics that I'm interested in teaching, especially. So I observed that she tended to do the phrases in a similar way that she was trying to speak Farsi. I
Uh-huh.
mean, when you heard her Farsi speaking, it sounded similar to the way she was playing those free rhythm phrases on the oud.
Uh-huh.
And so it brought in another question that, oh, could it be that there is a relation? So in these two questions, I put them in one pot, and I went for the interdisciplinary of linguistics and music. And I read here and there about a lot of stuff, and even the relationship that had with the brain functions. That's a huge topic in music cognition for the
Mm,
past two decades or so, at least.
mhm,
And that led me to my PhD thesis, which was on the free rhythm in Persian classical music. I worked on finding the common foundations, the common base grounds that would lead into different grades of rhythm in
mhm,
Persian language and Persian Dastgah music.
mm,
And that was a very successful thesis, I would say, not because I did it, but because um, my advisor, who was a linguist, actually,
mhm,
he believed that what I had done could be a PhD in linguistics, although I
mm,
hadn't planned for that. I had thought that the thing in the linguistic part is already solved in Persian language. I only need to bring it to Persian music. But then after doing some work, I realized that there was some work there to be done,
yeah.
and then that led me to work. Actually, it was good that I was a musician already. Um, I had samples
Mm,
of spoken language,
mhm,
uh, which I segmented into syllables.
mhm,
Let me give you a live example. If
yeah.
I speak a simple sentence in Persian,
Mm,
and let me tell you the name of my thesis in Farsi, for example. It
yes.
was بنیان مشترک ریتم در موسیقی دستگاهی و زبان فارسی. Or the other way around. بنیان مشترک ریتم در زبان فارسی و موسیقی دستگاهی ایران.
Mm,
If you take it as a phrase, it has syllables, of course. Like
mm,
it says بنیان, and you can clap with it. You
mm,
can say بنیان مشترک ریتم. I can say it differently, of course. I can say بنیان مشترک ریتم. I can make it stretch, or there is a limitation to how much you can change that, right? I
mhm,
mean, as a Farsi speaker,
yeah.
which brought in other stuff. If you like, we can talk in more details a bit later. But
Mm,
what I did was that I segmented a whole collection of poetry and prose
yeah.
manually on the software of Adobe Audition, and I put a clap
Uh-huh.
on every syllable,
Mm,
and then I had people coming in listening to couples of sound samples in which one was a clapping and the other one was an alteration of a sentence or a phrase.
mhm,
So, for example, I would have this clapping
mhm,
with salam.
mhm,
And I would ask people if they find the same timing in salam with, for example, or,
mm,
well, this is an extreme case, of course, because salam has only two syllables.
yeah.
And what I did as a clapping had three sounds. But I had longer sentences and I had pieces of poetry included. And through
Mm,
that, I managed to show that the rhythm we perceive from Persian language is exactly a sequence of syllables,
mhm,
and we perceive the syllables almost with the beginning of their vowels.
mm,
I mean, that's not my work. That was I borrowed it from another research that was done. It was shown that the perception of a syllable is with the burst of energy.
Mm,
And the burst of energy is always happening when you let the vowel out. The
mm,
consonants before the vowel, probably you are familiar with the structure of a syllable. In every
yeah.
syllable, we have some consonants and some vowels, of course.
Yes.
And when I say negar, I
Mm,
have ne and I have gar.
mm,
And in every syllable, you have at least one vowel that makes the core of the syllable.
mm. Yes.
Fortunately, in Farsi, we have only one consonant at the beginning of any syllable. So we don't have clusters like in English and other languages you might have.
Yes.
In Farsi, we don't have anything like, say, school,
Mm,
sk, sk
mm. Yeah.
doesn't exist in Farsi. We either have kul, for
Mm,
example, in a normal Farsi syllable structure, or we have sul, but we don't
mm,
have school. As
mm.
That's why any Farsi speaker would have a bit of a trouble to switch. If you tell them to say school, they would feel more comfortable saying a school in two
Yeah.
syllables.
Same in Arabic. I guess we have the similarity, and
Yeah,
that's
yeah,
why maybe Aruz is the same thing for both of us. Yeah.
absolutely. That's what I wanted to come to.
Yeah.
That what I did could explain how Aruz is formed.
Mm,
Because Aruz is one manifest of
mm.
how you put these syllables in groups to create a rhythmic pattern. Then,
Interesting.
if you repeat the groups, you have a cyclic
Mm,
kind of rhythmic feeling. If you don't repeat, you have a prose, a piece of prose. But still, there is a timing pattern which gives you a feeling of rhythm. And the final conclusion was that these patterns are not that many.
mm.
We have about 20 of them.
Oh.
And well, in language, it's more limited. It's only like, I mean, if you come to the cells, the
Mm,
very beginning, so it's the atonin. It's ta, tan, tanan, tananan.
mm,
And you can go for tanananan, but that's too long. So what I did showed the background or the backbone actually of all the stuff that was presented in the old treatises as ira'at,
mhm,
and in the aruz, in the linguistics for poetry, as afail,
mhm.
that make up the aruz. Like when you say that, for example, in the poetry of دوش دیدم که ملائک در میخانه زدند, a line from Hafiz. When
Mhm.
you have that, you are transferring it. Sorry, you are seeing the backbone of fa'ilatun, fa'alatun, fa'alatun, fa'ilun as the rhythm.
Yes.
And that is made by these tananan tan, tananan tan, tananan tan, tananan.
Mm,
Barabam bam, barabam bam, barabam bam, barabam. But you can still use the same tananan, not in a cyclic form, and make a piece of prose,
mm.
which was the case of free rhythm in Persian dastgah music, which is what we do in a lot of parts of taqasim playing, as we
Yes.
call it in Awazi music. I just wanted to give you an overview of what happened. And with that, I defended my PhD about 11 years ago.
Interesting, really. This is what
Okay.
I like about it is that it is again, the scientific curiosity and the hands-on research rather than, being on the keyboard or holding a pen on a paper. This is I like the experimental part of it and then evidencing what you think is right by doing the experiment, testing it. This is really interesting. I mean, this is understood from what you just have introduced. That is
Mhm.
sufficient enough to get this understanding.
I'm glad about it. I hope it's clarifying a lot of things that people were more prone to see as divided
Mm,
subjects. Funnily,
mm,
after I had done all this, I suddenly remembered that in old treatises of Maraghi and Ormavi, they
mm,
even have this expression of Nasr Nagamat and
mm.
Nazm Nagamat.
Yeah.
And we call Nasr prose and
Mm.
Nazm shi'r.
Yes.
So
Mm,
the poetry. So they
mm,
even knew about it then. but it
Mm,
looked so obvious to them that they didn't go further in explaining that part. They thought, well, this is obvious. You are doing a nasr, a piece
mm.
of prose
Yes.
with naramat, or you are doing a nazm, which is a piece of poetry with naramat. And with the nazm and naramat, they used ira'at, the rhythmic cycles.
Mm,
So I think I'm glad about what I did in my PhD, not just because I did the degree. I told you a bit
mm,
earlier that I was into this habit of using projects
mm,
or situations for doing something that I really wanted to learn and
mm.
understand.
Yeah.
And I took the chance to understand what was going on with the rhythm and the timing,
Yeah.
especially the rhythm.
Dr. Nagar, let's translate the title. I do understand it a bit, but let's translate the title of the PhD. And
Yeah,
how
originally,
accessible is it? How accessible is it for those who have an
it's in
interest?
Farsi, unfortunately, and the papers I published during my PhD work, I think we published at least four of the parts separately in different situations in different magazines, and also in one case I presented one preliminary work as a lecture, but they are all in Farsi. So if I want to make it accessible, I have to write them in English for non-Parsi speakers. The original title in English would be Foundations of Rhythm
Hmm.
in Persian Music.
Yeah.
Officially it would be the Foundations of Rhythm in Persian language and dastgah music.
Mm. Interesting. Uh, Nigar, I will not say doctor every now and
Thank you.
then. All right.
Yeah, we are done with the PhD. Now we
Yeah.
switch to the musician.
Yeah. You were talking about too many things actually, phonetics and the music, أفاعيل or تفاعيل as we call them,
Mhm,
نثر, شعر, and you were starting with two main questions. The question of when does the talk becomes musical or a song, and the
mhm,
other question of free rhythm and music.
mhm.
So I'm sure you got to the answer.
Partly.
So can we summarize the answer and then go into some illustrations of some of this material has been approached in the PhD?
Yes, for the free rhythm, I got the answer that the timing patterns,
Mm,
if we can call that widely rhythm, because rhythm is an ambiguous word. People tend to take it as beat
mm,
at one end, and some people would understand it as what we call ira, like the
mm,
rhythmic cycle. Some people might take it in a broader sense that is used in other arts and in cinema, for example, that
mm.
the rhythm was too boring.
Yeah.
So it's quite a vague word. So if I want to be more to the point, I would like to use the word timing patterns.
Hmm. Mm,
The timing patterns of um, free rhythm parts in
mm,
Persian Dastgah music are exactly the same as we have in the Persian language.
mhm,
The rules that they are put together is what we call additive, in
mm,
the sense that you have cells that don't change shape within when they are added to one
mm,
another.
mm.
So you can safely work with them like Lego pieces.
Exactly.
So you have one, you have this, you have that. If you use the same kind of cell and put them in a row, you can feel something repetitive,
Mm,
which, for example, appears very much in Bahr Tawil in Persian. Uh, it's not a classical piece of music. It has shown itself in classical as well, but it's more like a folk street music
mm,
in 200 years ago or so originally. But it's a repetition of like dim da da dum dim da da dum dim da da dum dum da da dum da, and it continuously repeats this timing pattern of dim da da dum dim da da dum dim da da dum dim da da dum,
This is
which
like
can
مستفعل مستفعل
um,
مستفعل. Yeah.
uh,
Dim dadadam
I would
مستفعل.
understand that as
Oh
mufta'ilun,
yeah, it's a variant of it. Yes. Yeah.
Yes,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Yeah.
So you can do that, or you can go a bit more. complicated, if I use the word complicated here
mm,
safely, and change the pattern from
mm,
one to another, but still keep some relevance.
mm,
Like if I say dim dalalam daram daram dim dalalam.
mm,
What is the similarity between the second one, dim dalalam dadam dalam? I'm taking the last part of
mm,
muftailon, as we call it.
mm,
Elon, elon,
mm, mm.
muftailon, elon, elon, muftailon, for
Yeah,
example,
yes.
which you can see as tan tananan, tanan, tanan, tan tananan. If
Mm-hmm.
I say it in the terms of atanin instead of tafaid.
Yeah.
So the rule is you can take pieces
Mm.
of those and repeat them if you like.
Interesting.
You can still go further and don't repeat anything.
Yeah.
You can just go for like dam da ram bam bam dim dam da dam da dam da dam, and this will be complete prose.
Mm.
You don't still there is some timing patterns, of course, and the timing patterns have their own identity saved like a
Yeah.
piece of Lego, as I said, but you can put them on the side of one another. And the good thing about, I don't know if it's good or bad, but it's a kind of freedom it gives you, this kind of mindset gives you, is that you have a whole range in a spectrum. You have the possibility of a whole range to go from fully ordered
Mm.
to a not order at all, to zero order. By
Mhm.
fully ordered, I mean a repetitive, like dim dadalam, dim dadalam, dim dadalam, dim dadalam. And
Yeah.
the other end is that you have no repetition at all,
Mm.
with the same Lego pieces, with the same cells to be used. And this is a character type that, of course, you can have with such a mindset where you have the cells or the basic entities untouched.
Mm.
But if you take the other approach, which comes from, for example, um, Western classical music, where you have a whole time which represents itself in a bar,
Mm.
then you divide that. So what you are perceiving is that you perceive a boom, boom,
Mm.
boom. And then you decide if you want to have two beats inside. Boom, boom, boom. And then you count that as one, two,
Mm.
one, two. Or if you decide to divide it in three, one, two, three, boom, three, boom,
Mm.
two, three. Or you want to divide the same amount of time, the same duration in four. And then sometimes you decide to have three beats, and in one of the beats you divide it in two, in the other beat you divide it in three. So inside is changing
Mm.
as or while the outside shell is kept.
Mhm.
And this is actually what we write in bars with
Mm.
time signatures. When I write a piece of music in 4/4
Yeah.
or in 3/4, I'm referring to that you who are reading this sheet music know that we have a 1 and 2 and 3 and 1 and 2 and 3 and as a cycle.
Mm.
And inside, a lot of things can happen. You can have syncopations, you can have a lot of rests, you can have this and that, and all different figures happening in. This
Mm.
is a completely different approach than the
Yes.
other one, which is taking the cell as a pattern and then putting it on the side of the other one.
Okay, so the first approach which you have experimented into the Persian language
Uh-huh.
is as you said syllable. Is this is not applicable maybe to the other languages? Is there any category of languages here?
Uh, well, good that you asked. Actually, I first understood this through language or linguistics in general and
Mm.
phonetics, to be exact. They were talking about
Mm.
two separate worlds of rhythm in languages.
Yeah.
They named one as syllable timed languages
Mm.
and the other one as stressed timed.
Uh-huh.
Stress-timed, like English language, tends to easily compress and decompress syllables according to the placement of the stressed syllable.
Mm.
And
Okay.
then in syllable timed languages, you don't touch the duration of every syllable that dramatically. You can talk faster, you can talk a bit more slowly, you can emphasize on something if you make it a bit longer. But if you make it too long,
Mm.
then the proportions of that word or whatever structure you have in that language is damaged.
Mm.
But
Interesting.
in English language, you can stretch or stretch, or how to put it. You can compress syllables into one time and then make the other one coming longer. There is this very classic example in the books where they talk about this comparison of stress timing versus syllable timing. And they say
Mm.
that, for example, in English, you can say, my brother and I went to school together.
Mm.
This is a very classical example for that.
Mm.
And in my brother and I, you are putting a lot of syllables into a short time. Da-da-da-dam, ba-da-da-dam, da-da-dam, which is not the case in Farsi.
Mm-hmm.
In Farsi, you can generally talk faster or generally talk more slowly. And the longest you can have for a syllable, if you are not singing,
Mm.
is on words like ob, for example, or asp.
Mm-hmm.
Asp means a horse, and ob is water.
Mm.
You don't say up.
Mm.
Up is not taken as ob.
Mm.
There are two different sound
Yeah, yeah.
structures. And for syllable timed languages, they also count French in.
Mm.
I've forgotten what German is taken as. There are a lot of research in that area done on different, and they even have indexes how to calculate. I mean,
Mm.
they do it on timing. Like they actually segment different parts of the language, and they calculate the durations, and then they decide if this language is taken as a syllable timed or as a stress timed language. That area was done before. I only did it for Farsi and compared Farsi samples with the previously done research on French, English, Spanish, Japanese, and
Arabic.
German, as far as I remember. So
Arabic.
that part is Arabic was considered different in different categories. Sorry, in different accents. Like
Mm.
all through the countries that speak Arabic, they found different varieties,
Yes, yes, exactly.
as far as I
Thank,
can remember.
very, very nice discussion, actually, Nagar. What about the first question of talk to song?
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
That part is still my next passion to work on. I have some hunches upon, but
Mm.
I haven't worked seriously in that field yet. And that is
Mm.
that um, in speech, in every language, you
Mm-hmm.
have some patterns of raising the pitch or letting it go down,
Mm.
uh, through which you express some meaning.
Mm.
Like when you want to express your anger, you use some kind of prosody. So you use some pattern. Well, the most famous one is for asking questions, which is almost universal. You
Mm.
always tend to rise the
Yeah.
pitch in the end when you are asking a question. But in every language, there are also patterns that you can find of how you rise, or the rise and fall of your speech
Yeah.
pattern is expressing some meaning, like
Mm.
some emotions,
Mm.
but they are not graded.
Mm.
Like I have my voice here, and wherever I am, I can just
Mm.
raise it up or let it fall.
Mm.
But in music, we do that in digital sense.
Mm.
Like we have notes that are tuned
So
to something.
discrete, maybe
It's
discrete.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. By
Mm.
digital, I meant discrete.
Yeah,
You're
yeah.
right. So they're discrete. They are not analog. You don't. Generally, you don't. You can, of course, in music do a glissando,
Yeah,
but you have some notes that are previously decided as points of uh, your pitch to
yeah,
be
yeah.
on.
Interesting.
But at the same time, in music, you have a much wider range, while in speech, you have well, normally around a fourth, like a tetrachord of
Mm,
moving your voice. And my guess is that in Persian language,
mm,
we have some patterns of those which are reflected or are coming from the most Middle Eastern interval, which we call mujannab,
mm,
like the one we use in Bayati and Shur and that kind of tetrachord. Like
mm,
when we say da 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 da, this interval
mm,
seems to be appearing in
mm,
at least recitation of poetry.
mm.
So the if I find the time and somehow get to do that part of research, or if anybody else is interested in that, I think that's an area to look at.
It is really, really. Uh, Actually, Negar, you have done great work in this PhD. A lot of things has been touched, and a lot of gaps I would guess has been addressed.
If I am not lazy and write it down in English, it might be more useful for other people,
Yes,
hopefully.
and for the phonetics part, any flavor of what you have done so far in that PhD?
What I was working on lately was, I hoped actually uh, to make something like an app
Mm,
or something of a computer program, which could automatically um, turn any utterance, any collection of syllables into
mm,
the rhythm.
mm,
Like we give it a piece of poetry and it gives, or a piece of recited
mm,
text,
mm,
and it gives us back the rhythmic structure.
mm,
Like what I'm doing it with tapping.
mm,
I would like to show that you can do it with any kind of impulse, and any input
mm,
can be possibly turned into that. And I actually looked into some possibilities where you could have a simple algorithm of
mm,
finding the beginning of this burst of energy, which would be possible to show your vowel,
mm,
and then synchronize percussive sound with
mm,
that. And that was
mm,
actually what I did manually. I found it I had the beginning of the energy on the software. I would
mm,
find it in the wave
mm,
of the audio file.
mm,
And then on the moment of that energy burst, I would insert a percussive sound on the other channel.
mhm.
And then on a stereo file on the left and right channels, on one channel I would hear the original, and on the other channel I would hear a tapping to check
Interesting,
if it was working or not.
interesting.
So it's not that complicated. It just needs a big database and
Mm,
a working algorithm. And I would actually like to invite anybody interested in
mm,
such a project to produce an app or a software, or an online, even a web-based
mm.
machine that would work
Interesting.
like that.
That's a very interesting project, really.
Yeah. Yeah.
Nigar, did you
Sorry to
find?
put in too much of
No,
my
actually,
interest
I'm
in.
so greedy with my questions. Actually, if you are interested, I could go on. Actually, or save some time for another
That depends
interview.
on you.
Yeah, you know,
No, I just wanted to say that if we want to get into details, it might to be clear, it might need some visuals.
sure.
So only talking about it won't get us much further.
Mm,
But this could be a nice invitation for whoever is interested in such a subject,
mm,
and then we can carry on in a different format, or on a different platform, in a
sure.
way.
Interesting. Nigar, I'm sure you found some shortcomings while exploring the rhythm and iqa and so on, whatever you were doing in this PhD. Can you highlight some of these shortcomings and maybe solutions, proposed solutions? Now, when we take
Uh,
it to another language, let's say, or another cultural type of music.
there is always well, let me say something before I get to the shortcomings, as you put them. If you are genuinely curious to find the answer to a question, I think you will encounter two problems generally. I mean, problem in a general sense. One is that people tend to see such questions as questioning what is already there, in the sense of having doubts about something, which I have no problems with. I think science always, or any knowing always starts with having questions and doubts. You might be totally wrong about your doubts, but you have to have some questions in order to go for an answer. And then if you find some answer to it, you might feel like, oh, okay, I finally understood something.
Hmm.
But I've encountered a lot of people whom, when I was doing interviews, for example, or when I was checking this rhythm patterns about pieces of poetry that I had done with this segmentation and so on, and they would say, "But this is already clear. Of course, this is the rhythm of poetry."
Mm.
So they would tend to be a bit rigid in a sense, uh, with feeling. I don't know if threatened is too big a word, but I don't find a better word, like as if whatever I have already is too precious to ask questions about.
Hmm.
While I'm not saying that it's not precious. I'm just trying to have a better understanding about what you hold precious. There are many musicians, especially in a traditional sense,
Mm.
that would find musicology as as an as an authority threatening them. They would think that if I find an answer to this question and say that, look, you have this kind of structure for free rhythm.
Hmm.
I have found an explanation for what free rhythm in Persian Dasgah music is working like. And
Mm.
when I put that forward, they feel limited. They think I'm giving them orders. If they don't do according to what I'm saying, they will be out of Sharia, or some kind of. You see what I'm saying?
Yes.
I think it comes from a misunderstanding in the background culture.
Mm.
Understanding what something is working like is not adding limitation. It might even work in the opposite direction and bring some more light to the corners you haven't seen. Let me give you another example. In Persian Dastgah music, which is not older than 200 years in the form we know now,
Hmm.
of course, it has its root in the previous centuries, but in the format we have from Qajar time to now, it's about 200 years old.
Hmm.
In the traditional sense of performing that, the distinction or the separation between the free rhythm parts and the so-called rhythmic parts,
Hmm.
the metered parts, which they call zarbi, meaning
Mm.
it's beated, it has pulsation, it has clear beats,
Yes.
and غیر zarbi, which is the awazi part, which is the non-metered.
Mm.
There is clear distinction. So the ensemble or the instrumentalist starts with a pish daramad, which is before the daramad of the dasko, and then it goes to the non-metered part, which is not accompanied by percussion. Then there might come a char mezrab, which is a metered piece, and the tombak player or any percussionist can play a repetitive pattern, and then it goes again to another non-metered part. So it's clearly divided.
Hmm.
The Nasr Nagamat is perfectly divided from Nasr Nagamat.
Hmm.
Nasr from Nazm, sorry.
Yes.
Uh, I was once during my PhD, or maybe it was before my PhD, that I was talking with Master Hossein Alizadeh. I was
Mm.
exchanging opinions. I think it was actually about oud playing, not about my research yet.
mm,
And he inspired me with a phrase he said. He said that the oud players in the other traditions don't need char mezrab. They beautifully go in and out of a sort of rhythm.
mm,
You don't feel completely unrhythmed in one part and then fully rhythmed. That is his expression.
mm,
And there I was thinking that, aha, okay, that's interesting. And then because he was very interested in Indian music at that time, I think he gave me some samples of similar but not exactly the same idea in Indian music performance. But I went on looking for that quality, and Alizadeh himself has done samples of this too.
mm,
Like when he's performing improvisation, he gets in and out
mhm.
of the beats.
Yeah.
Uh, as an example, I wanted to say that when you understand how you can work with rhythmic patterns in this musical culture, in this music culture, and you see that there are cells that you can put together and create any layer of rhythm. And by layer of rhythm, I mean it can go as fundamental as a rhythmic cycle, like
Yeah.
what a daire, a bendir can play,
Mm,
uh, or it can get as on the top layer where the singer is singing.
mm,
And they both can use this kind of cell-like, this additive cell-like idea and get into some points of connecting with each other and get out of it.
mhm,
This can shed light on some corners that look unachievable
mm,
before.
mm,
And it's not out of the culture itself even. I mean, it's coming from the culture. I mean, of course, a lot of other musicologists can go for other approaches and find better or more complete descriptions of how free rhythm is working. Or they might even come to me and say, I think you have a mistake here. This doesn't match in your
yeah.
model. And that is how science is supposed how
Sure.
knowledge is supposed to go further, of course. I have nothing
Yeah.
against that. But the shortcoming
Mm,
would be if we, I mean, when we see our tradition, our heritage, as something which needs protection, and
mm,
we are the guards.
mm,
I
mm,
personally think that we have a lot of uh, beautiful stuff in our heritage in every aspect,
mm,
and some of them can be better, can we can develop in a better direction, or we can develop not just in better or worse sense, but in matching what we need now in that direction, more
mm,
further in that direction, where if I need to create a space with
mm,
my music which needs something that didn't exist before, maybe I don't want to play a char mesrab.
mhm,
Maybe it was good enough to express what Mirza Abdullah wanted to 200 years ago, or
mm,
what Sabo wanted to 100 years ago, well, less than 100.
mm,
But maybe I need some more elements now in my music, but I still am a Farsi speaker.
mm,
And I don't want to borrow the qualities that don't come in my original mindset,
mm.
like borrowing rap from American culture. I'm not against it,
I
but
see your point. Yeah.
I find my mother language closer to me if
Mm,
I don't have to stay limited. So
mm,
if I can manage to observe and understand what is there and take it further, I'm simply having more possibilities. But I've encountered a lot of musicians who are kind of at least not flexible towards
mm,
that stuff, I would say. That would be from the social aspect
mm,
of it.
mm,
The other aspect would be um, when you work on something you envision, but you are not running an organization or institute, so it means you don't have that much of a budget. So you can't turn it into a project that would come to things like tools or apps or softwares or um, a product through which people can really experience the outcome.
Yeah.
It might easily sit on papers in a book or in an archive in one or two libraries, and that means practically it would be as good as not none.
Or maybe those fortunate people who get access to it and use it for a practical reason, or maybe
Hopefully.
extend it.
Well, I have tried to use it for my teaching, but maybe it needs more work to be turned into a
Mm,
teaching material still.
Interesting. Doctor, you touched into several aspects of when you mentioned Sharia and the authority and so on. And I remember
Mhm.
one time you mentioned the holiness of a book.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that
let's
is
talk about that.
good.
Yeah.
Um, that is a subject that can have many aspects to it. One
Mm,
would be about the resistance or well, the criticism, which sometimes turns
mm,
into some sort of resistance against writing the type of music that we have in Middle East
mm,
with the Western notation.
mm,
Uh, and I know some people who are actually fully against it. They think that this kind of writing doesn't reflect this
mm,
music at all, and this is not what we play, and blah, blah, blah. Which I can understand because this type of writing was not um, completed, or the evolution of that type of writing was not with this culture, with this background culture.
mm,
So when you borrow it at some point of time, I mean, it has developed through some centuries in some direction with some content.
mhm,
Uh, let's not forget that a sheet of music in Western music even doesn't fully reflect the sound. That's another story.
right.
But before that, this kind of writing has developed with another content of music. Fine. Then suddenly in Iran, as an example of the Eastern kind of music, Middle East and the other cultures, the neighboring,
Mm,
they encounter something valuable.
mm,
Like all of us using computers, we didn't invent computers. Computers and cell phones didn't develop with our types of culture, with our types of writing, even.
mm,
But we've encountered them and thought they were useful, and we decided to use them. Some of musicians in our story thought, okay, what are the limitations of this tool, if we
mm,
see it as a tool? What do we need to add to it to use for our own purposes,
mm,
not to lose the qualities that we need?
mm,
One of those musicians was Alina Rivasiri. He was the founder of music school in Iran.
mhm,
And he was a very clever musician, a wonderful tar player. He was a virtuoso. He was a composer. He actually tried to revive writing about music and having concerts. And so he was a very, very important figure. Abul Hassan Sabah learned a lot of stuff with him.
mm,
Of course, he was already a musician, but he went to Vaziri's school to learn further and to learn writing music and
mm,
such stuff. So what Vaziri thought was that, oh, we don't want to lose our mujannab interval, the one
mm.
now we write with Quran and Suri.
Yes.
And he invented symbols
Mm,
to write them. Quran, or half flat, which
mm,
Arabs and Turks write with a dashed flat sign.
mm,
Vaziri wrote another symbol with it's like looks more like a flag. It's
mm.
very similar to a flat sign, like a B,
Yeah.
but upside down.
Yes. Mm,
And he used also the symbol of sharp,
mm,
but instead of two parallel lines on the not vertical side,
mm.
he used a P-like.
Yeah. Or
Uh, yeah,
greater
that
than symbol. Yeah.
so he used that for Suri, and these names also are Vaziri's invention. But with that, he wanted to protect the content of our intervals while using the notation coming from the West. To what extent it was successful or not could be judged, of course. People can talk about it, can criticize it, can find the limitations this has brought in and what other freedoms we might have, blah, blah, blah. That's another whole story. But he wrote pieces that we are using now. We are playing without having access to the original. There are very few recordings of Abul Hassan Sabah himself. But the material he wrote down to teach his students, which were published, one in his own time and the others later, are the stuff people are playing all the time now. So if we didn't use writing, we had lost them all, exactly the same as we had lost the repertoire of Abdul Qadir Maraghi and Safiuddin Ormavi and the others. Although they had a kind of writing with alphabet, Aleph, Be, Jim, blah, blah, the abjad alphabet they used for notation. But that was very limited, and we have only a handful of such sheets, which we have problems reading them still. I mean, in the sense that we can play them. Only a few of them have been turned into actual music recently. This is one aspect of it, that you are borrowing some kind of tool. Let me still call it a tool. And the very good example I find for that was that when mobile phones came to Iran with no option of using Farsi alphabet, or most of them didn't have them. There were no smartphones yet. But people found that text messages were really useful. So they started texting with the alphabets that were already there, A, B, C, D, E, F, blah, blah, blah. But they wanted to write in Farsi. So they had to use some kind of convention, right? And I remember one occasion which my brother, having studied linguistics, using X as the sound of khe, because that's one of the standard phonetic symbols for the sound of khe. And the other person on the other side of the texting stream read it as X, really. And there came a point where my brother wanted to say akhe, as an expression of akhar, meaning but, or on the other hand. And the other person had understood it as akse, which means a photo or a picture, or the other way around, because akse can have two meanings. And the series of text messages based on that misunderstanding was getting longer and longer, because every side of this message exchange was trying to make sense of it, and they couldn't, because they were not using the same convention. They didn't have the same rules. And the borrowing of these letters in text messaging, of course, was the cause of the problem. And later on, the options of using alphabets in Farsi came in, of course, but that's another story, that people were saying, oh, well, but this is also a writing that doesn't express how I wanted to say it. So that also needs some additional.
Very interesting analogy, really.
So you see, whenever you are using a writing, and this is the general sense, whenever you are using a code to reflect something of a sound, and it's not even limited to sound. Imagine a script for a movie. In order to put it into what it will become in the end, you need an interpretation always. It's just a note. You see what I mean? If I have a piece of writing and it says that Shakespeare has written Romeo and Juliet, and there's a series of conversations, like the dialogues, and then before that, maybe it gives you just like, it's a night scene, it's outside, and Romeo is talking with Juliet in a quiet, I don't know, balcony, for example. But it's not giving you any more detailed information. So if you want to make a drama on stage, if you want to have a theater piece, or if you want to make a movie out of it, you have to put in a lot of information yourself.
Interesting.
with reciting a piece of poetry. If you give me a piece of poetry of Khayyam or Hafiz, it's
mm,
written, okay. How am I going to read it
mm,
is based on my previous knowledge of the language and of the meanings.
mm,
And we used to have a lot of jokes around that of how people would be capable or incapable of understanding what Hafiz is saying. And you won't believe it that there were even jokes made into TV shows about people who couldn't read a verse by Hafiz correctly.
wow.
So
Yeah.
it's with any piece of writing, and
Mm,
talking about putting the things against
mm,
any such conventions in the sense of holiness or resisting in
mm,
a traditional sense.
mm,
I brought in that subject because a lot of traditionalists
mm,
insist that writing music is not good and we have to do it only by ear
mm,
on the basis that writing is not reflecting everything.
mhm,
I would argue against that and say that if you think that writing will reflect everything,
mm,
you are wrong. I can give you all examples in the world that a writing is just a note.
mm,
You will have to bring in a lot of other things. One other reason about this resistance is that the audience of that, which are supported by the common culture,
mm,
would tend to see anything in a kitab, in a
mm.
book, in a written form, as somehow holy.
Yeah.
They think whatever is written is more important, and that is the reference.
Mhm,
And because of that, then people, of course, are afraid that, okay, if you'd give me this writing, and then other people take this as the reference and it's not reflecting everything, then part of this precious thing will be lost. And
yeah.
that I understand very well, but the whole thing comes from a wrong basis, in my opinion. We have to have um, how to say have a right understanding of interpretation and using tools
Mm,
in order to live with them musically or in a more general sense.
mhm.
Sorry if I
Interesting.
sounded too much like a lecture.
No, no, it's really you did it very well, really presented, Nagar. And this maybe leads us to the question of the holiness of the music theory. There is an impression that the music theory is maybe complete or comprehensive for you guys, like the Turkish people too. But you are insiders, and I believe that again, this comes through the holiness perspective.
Partly, not all
Yeah.
of it.
Mm,
It can fall into that trap too, I would say.
mm,
I personally think that this is my personal view. I have things to back it up, but I
mm,
also welcome any criticism on that.
mm.
Uh, Obvious without saying, of course.
Yeah.
I think what is being presented in this under the umbrella of theory
Mm,
in many of the musics of Middle East um, are mistaken for
mm,
many reasons. Or from first from different aspects, and then for many reasons. One is some people's understanding of theory as a word
mm,
is taking them into what I said before as a set of instructions to read and write
mm,
and use the stuff.
mm,
Like if I want to program something on my software to play for me, what theory I would need.
mm,
That I would take more as a manual.
mm,
Like I have something I want to work with, and I need some descriptions of how this works.
yeah.
So this is one aspect you can take for theory.
Mm,
So it is giving you where is the button to start. You have to press this for that, and then this is the knob you have to turn up or down for the other purpose. Then you have to play with these faders for
mm,
what purpose, and this will bring you to this outcome.
Mm-hmm.
So this is a manual. I
Yeah.
understand. Manuals are very useful. I'm not having anything against any manual. Of course, we all need them for such. So if we understand that we are dealing with a manual to use something, it's fine.
Mm-hmm.
It's like having a set of rules to make paragraphs in a writing.
Mm.
That's fine. But it's not theory in the sense that that would give you an understanding
Mm.
of how this thing works. If you read a manual and if you memorize a manual of how a mixer for music and sound is working, do you
Mm.
really understand how it's working? You just learn what to push when for what.
Mm-hmm.
So you have gained some knowledge of an interaction, how to interact with this device, but it doesn't give you an understanding necessarily. So I'm just saying this. I'm not saying that we don't have to use the word theory. I'm saying that we have to be aware of what we expect, not to mistake it for another meaning because of the word we are using for that. The other side of it would be that, for example, you come to me and you say, "Can you teach me Persian Dastgah theory, please? I want to understand what is happening in Segah." And then I tell you that, yes, of course, for Segah, you have these notes. By the way, we are dealing with maqam music, and there is no such thing as a scale. We have a set of tones as this and this and this, as a tetrachord or a pentachord or three chords. We call ajnas, and then we put these ajnas together, and there is a most prominent note we call shahed, for example, and then there is a note we finish on, we call qarar or east or khateme or whatever. And then you think, okay, you have learned it. The question is, have you? Uh, it comes to another question. What is the indicator of having learned something? In the sense of using a manual, I'm expecting that instructions in the manual put into action will lead me to some production of some kind. It is supposed to work in a sense that when I push this deletes the file. When I turn that, this will raise the volume. So I'm interacting with the device and I'm expecting an output. Fine. But when I give you this kind of information about trichord, pentachord, tetrachord, qarar, shahed, blah, 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 what is the outcome you expect? If I expect you to be able to play a taqsim on that, let's assume that is the expectation.
Yeah.
Will it do it? I have never ever had the experience that it works in that direction. So this kind of information is not leading us to the outcome of playing anything in Segah. So what other things are we expecting?
Mm-hmm.
I'm asking questions. Maybe some people come up and
Yeah.
have some smart answers to that I haven't thought about. But I really want to know. Okay, I'm using that information myself, but I always doubt
Mm-hmm.
if this is a description I give because I know the material already. Like I know my mother, how she looks,
Mm-hmm.
or a book or an instrument. And I give you information. For example, I say oud is a string instrument with a rather large bowl. It has a big body and a short neck, and a bent peg box.
Mm-hmm.
And I think I have given you information on the oud. What kind of knowledge is that? Do you know oud really? Or I am kind of satisfied because I managed to describe it.
Mm-hmm.
It's okay if I manage to describe it for some purposes, for example, for categorization,
Yeah.
if I want to label it. When I
Mm-hmm.
have this information, I know that it's not a wind instrument. Fine. If I want to categorize it. If I
Mm-hmm.
categorize Segah under this tetrachord, I can find the relationship between the notes this one has with shur, for example,
Yeah.
shares some of the notes, some of the nagamat, some of the
Mm-hmm.
sounds I'm using with shur. So it can lead, actually, that kind of categorization can lead into some practical usage that I will remember that, okay, then since I know shur and I know segar, now I found the connections. And
Mm-hmm.
in my next composition, actually, I might consciously use this connection.
Mm-hmm.
So you see where I'm going. I'm saying that this kind of description
Mm-hmm.
can have some outcome, but it's not theory in a bigger perspective. It's just some information to categorize things and label them.
Mm-hmm. User guide
That's
level of knowledge.
partly user guide level, partly librarian guide. Like you have tags on them. You have a big library
Mm.
and you tag the books. You put them in shelves.
Yeah.
In order to access them, you can use the tags,
Mm.
but it doesn't necessarily show you what's inside the book.
Mm.
Uh, that's the way I see it,
Mm.
and I'm actually dreaming of trying to go for more research, in the sense that we can make some real sense,
Mm.
because I also believe that from what we hear as either music lovers or musicians, we are perceiving some sound impulses,
Mm.
some input is perceived by our brains
Mm.
that is leading to some of these understandings that we get later. For example, my father was not a musician, never played any instrument seriously. He would sing a lot, and he had listened to many pieces, and
Mm.
he would immediately be able to categorize them in different dasgahs, in different parts of dasgahs. Where is it going? Is it a good performance or not, because of this, because of that?
Mm.
Or was it a traditional one or not? So he had the knowledge you
Yeah.
would expect from this kind of encounter. All the musicians from that culture would have.
Mm.
Uh, and I think it shows that any listener is perceiving uh, some material which is not reflected in this kind of what we call theory so far. And if we can discover them and put them in a better set that will really give us an understanding, not just a
Mm.
description or labels or categorization, then we might be able to get closer to what we expect from a theory.
Mm.
But so far, we only have gone as to the level of either categorization in an archive or labeling them to find some connections and not all of them, and so on and
Mm.
so forth.
Yeah. But you have, I mean, came up with the concept of Radif, which might be an alternative of method books or something. It's maybe beyond that, right?
No, if you ask an Iranian musician what radif is, you will have three different definitions.
Hmm.
One is the model which shows what dasgahs we have and what parts in every dasgah sits in a row.
Mm.
Like, well, those small parts are called gushe.
Yeah.
So what gushes we have in every dasgah and the whole set of dasgahs. So
Mm.
it's a set of what we already have.
Mm.
And people sometimes call this approach to radif, some people call the guide, the literature of dasgah music.
Okay.
And some even take it further and say that it's like a grammar to the
Mm.
language of dasgah music.
Mm.
The other meaning of that could be what every ustad has been teaching to the students in the
Mm.
content of dasgah. For example, we have radif from Sabah. We have another radif from Mirza Abdullah. Another radif is from Dawami. Another one from Mirza Hossein Qoli, who was a brother to Mirza Abdullah. And interestingly, Mirza Abdullah and Mirza Hossein Qoli two brothers,
mm,
they learn from the same source,
mm,
but we see two different radifs from them. They are not totally different in the sense of shur is shur.
yeah.
Here's where the theory is coming to a question mark. What am I talking about when I say shur is shur?
Mm, yeah.
But it's not a fixed melody. You
Mm,
see, there are some dark areas to clarify, I think.
mm,
What Radif is presenting mostly,
mm,
and there's another approach which would say this is like a fixed manifest
mm,
of a total open variety of expressions you could have with the essence of Dastgah, like all those modes and all those rhythms and things. These that showed in Radif are only some samples of them.
mm.
You see
So,
how different
yeah,
these
yeah. I see that, theory in general is like pointers to a vast knowledge. And now
could be.
Radif is more of a closer or maybe more specific set of pointers for further for the same vast knowledge. It's like
It's
two
not,
layers of pointers.
you can take it as that. Yeah, there are some who would say that, well, Radif is
Mm,
only a tool for education. It's like a set of courses a
mm,
student or a learner is supposed to go through
mm,
to master this content of music, which would be the Dastgah system.
mm.
That's
Interesting.
another understanding of it. I mean, you can find all different kinds of attitudes toward the content of what we call radif. But what we talk about, I mean, in the recent decades, they started talking about dastgah music
Mm,
to get away from this radif topic,
mm,
to say that okay, I'm still doing dastgah, but I'm not necessarily playing Mirza Abdullah radif.
mm,
And in this context, I'm standing somewhere between maqam in general, I mean maqam music in general, and the Persian version of it,
mm. Interesting. So
which
how
I
is
can give
that?
you example,
Yeah, yeah. I would like to actually. Yeah.
certainly.
Mm.
Oh, you were asking something, or did I interrupt your question?
No, you can carry on. I won't forget my question.
I wanted to say that I personally, to the creative level, if I want to talk
Mm,
about it, I have used this approach in my own music making. Like
mm,
when I compose something,
mm,
uh, I have this content which you can broadly call the essence of a maqam in mind,
mm,
which is like a very fluid shape of not a melody, but something that could be developed into a melody. It's further away from only the notes. It's more like what they usually try to call a melody model. Like you know what notes you will go to, but it's not a scale in the sense that you will always go up and down.
uh-huh.
So it's more like a set of movements between what notes.
Mm.
But
Interesting.
you don't have the timings of those.
Mhm,
This is usually what a lot of ideas about what makes maqam different from a scale is
mm,
dealing with. Like you
yeah.
say, well, in Persian music, some people made a mistake of calling mahur similar to major as
Mm,
a scale.
yeah.
What mistake they are referring to is that in mahur, you are expecting some sort of movements,
Mm,
but you can change them, of course. But if you suddenly jump from the third note to the 12th note, for example,
mm,
you don't expect that in mahur. So in mahur, you are kind of dealing with a fluid shape of um, musical intervals in a row.
mm. Like a relationship and maybe repetitive touches. What we
Yeah,
call
it could be
maybe
repetitive touches.
sayr or behavior or
Very
movement.
close to that,
Yeah,
yes.
yeah.
Like a shape of melody, but in a very, very flexible sense. So I,
Mm,
I have that in mind.
mm,
I have some sort of categorization or connections possible,
mm,
which I can choose this or that. I can connect from here to there.
mm.
And then I have something I want to express. It can
mm,
go with some poetry, or it can be only instrumental.
mm,
And then all of these, all of these three can become my ingredients through which I give birth to a piece of music. One of the latest I have done I've called it a dead wind in
mm,
English.
mm,
Bad Mordast. I did a composition on a piece of poetry by Ahmad Shamlu. Ahmad Shamlu is one of our contemporary
mm,
poets. And the content of the poetry is dealing with two groups of people who probably are wishing for some wind of change.
mm,
The
mm,
wind is taken as something that would bring the change
mm,
here.
mm,
But one group is believing that no, that the wind is dead, it
mm,
won't come. The other is still fantasizing and saying that no, the mighty wind is still alive and it will come and do this and that. And this kind of conversation is going on without um, any conclusion to it. We as the audience of the piece of poetry, we never know if the wind is still alive or if it's dead.
mm.
So it's like a fight going on.
Yeah.
And for me, it was a very, very true expression of what we deal with, sometimes in a personal sense, that we want to do something, we want to believe in something, we want it to happen, we want to hope for something, but the other side of us says, no, sorry, it's dead, it's never going to happen. And sometimes in a social sense, in a political sense, in the world, you can find interpretations for that in every level. And
Mm,
musically, the ingredients I used was the combination of what we call bidad, in between bidad and shushtari,
mm,
maqam wise or dastgah wise, if I want to explain it,
mm,
and something between Dashti and Humayun in the other sense, plus an infrastructure of a pentatonic scale. So
interesting.
if you want me to analyze the skeleton of what material in the Dasgosens I've used in that composition, of course I didn't decide for that. It happened. But
Mhm,
because I had thought about it before,
mhm,
and I came to this point that these are the connecting points, this can give me that and that can give me that. When the feeling was there, when the
mm,
poetry was there, and when I felt like expressing this fight
mm,
between the hope and despair,
mm.
it emerged in
Interesting.
that piece I called Dead Wind.
Interesting. We will be listening to this piece.
I would be grateful to listen with you.
Yeah.
تعلیم می کند باد زنده است باد زنده است بیدار کار خویش هوشیار کار از کوه خورده
Negar, you mentioned that there is a modern approach for seeing Vestager, and you gave the example of Dead Wind. What's the medium of presenting this new perspective of seeing Vestager and the theory today?
I'm not sure if it's modern. Actually, I think it's very old. I myself, coming from a Kurdish background
Mm,
with the kind of maqam in that sense, in
mm,
the older times,
mhm,
how they deal, in my opinion, very minimalistically
mm,
with the material they have. plus the understanding that I have from the origins of combinations of tones that are usually termed under tetrachord, pentachord, and such things, which you can simplify, even go to the older layers and find the very old pentatonic
Mm,
interval kind of grid underneath. Like when you do a da 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 da,
mhm.
you can choose other things in between and go for other directions. These are all happening in the regional musics,
Yes. Mm,
which are probably coming from the older times.
mm,
We are not sure, we can't be sure if they are coming from the older times, but it gives a feeling that they are quite old. Recently,
mm,
I was working in a project with two of my colleagues, which I enjoyed a lot.
mm,
Maybe you would like to hear about that too.
mm,
And that was a kind of different approach to what is publicly called fusion, but we saw it differently. And that was that we were looking at three different music cultures,
mm,
trying to give the role of each music to one instrument.
mhm,
We were three instruments: an oud
mm,
that I played, a santur that a colleague of mine was playing in the very traditional dastgah system of
mm,
Iran, and the third instrument was viola, and in one section, a violin.
mm,
And we had decided to do a kind of conversation
mm,
between the Dastgah music and some Celtic sort of music development on the violin and viola.
mhm,
And my role was in that was borrowing the elements from Mesopotamian, or actually the Aramite
mm,
heritage, which is the North Mesopotamia.
mm,
The content I used to inspire myself were coming from the old hymns, which are still used in the old churches,
mhm,
still in Lebanon, and the groups that are active there.
mm,
And some of the melodies you could, I mean, we collected a lot of stuff from the Aramaic tradition. I listened to as many as I could. Some of them were obviously just new stuff, melodies taken from other parts of the world and put words on. But
mm,
some of them sounded,
mm,
especially because of the intervals, sounded very close to the musics of the old regions or old cultures we know in the region.
mm,
And from those, I handpicked some melodies.
mm,
And what we did, and we were planning for, was that we do conversations like three people
mm,
who speak their own language but are capable of understanding the other person's language. So,
mhm,
for example, if I understand Arabic,
mm.
you speak Arabic and I speak Farsi,
Yeah,
but we can maintain a conversation without speaking the other person's language.
interesting.
And we worked on that as a project. We did a concert in Tehran a couple of years ago, and then we did a recording and we released it as an album. There, I was very happy to feel
Mm,
that by being exposed to such presumably old melodies, which
mm,
were transmitted orally from generation to generation in mainly rituals of a religious nature,
yeah.
you could still see that, I can feel this is old.
Mm,
I
interesting.
can feel with the ornamentations, with the kind of vocal techniques, with all this stuff. I can feel the antique
Mm,
side of that.
mm,
What I wanted to say is that I don't see it as modern.
mm,
I see it, what I'm doing. I see as a person from modern times or modern world
mm,
looking at artifacts or objects
mm,
in a museum
mm,
and being inspired by them, or even at times even using their shapes and how they look to create something new. So if you were, for example, a designer who wanted to design a pattern for clothing,
Mm,
or if you wanted to make a book,
mm,
or if you wanted if you were a sculptor, for example, you could be inspired by all these, but still be a modern person in the sense of uh, being individual in facing the world. I think that is the main difference between a modern person and an old tribal or traditional person. My aim in what I'm doing is not keeping the tradition alive. The tradition is there. It doesn't need me.
mhm,
I'm the one who needs it. I'm in need of using what is there in the museums, in my heritage, in my background, to face the world, to face my life, to be creative in one sense or another. So
mm,
that's the way I'm seeing it. I'm not having a modern understand. Well, I consider myself a rather modern person, but the
mm.
stuff I'm dealing with is not modern.
Interesting. Nigar, what's the album you mentioned? So people can.
In English, we call it meanders,
Mm,
and in Farsi, it's called khutut bi makan, which is
mm,
khutut is the same in Arabic. I
yeah,
imagine makan is the same.
yeah.
Bi is without.
Uh-huh.
So it's the lines that have no place, if you want
Yeah.
to literally translate it.
Interesting, interesting. So I think we will take another opportunity to go into the overview of the Destiga system to
Well,
just give
as you like.
yeah.
Uh, well, there could be a whole session to
Mm,
talk about at least two different approaches,
mm,
two mainly different approaches towards Dastgah in
mm.
comparison to the, for example, Ottoman Maqam system or the nowadays Turkish system.
Yes,
And that's up to our listeners and us if
for
we want to
sure.
go into
For
this
sure,
detail.
we'll have another interview for that. Uh, but I think we should shed some light about Dawood's story,
Mhm.
Ran, because you just hit into that in the beginning that it was almost revived 30 years ago.
Certainly.
Maybe let's shed some light about this actually.
Good. I'll try to be brief on that. I just realized how much I've been talking.
No, no, we are. I'm enjoying actually like a good book. Let it
Uh,
be. I don't know
you
how
are
many
very
volumes.
kind. I hope whoever listens to it can also enjoy it.
Yeah.
But I will give you an overview, and then wherever you find
Mm,
points to go into details, let me
mm,
know, please.
mm,
The story is like we shared a huge common background with. Uh, I have to first ask who's we.
mm,
This nation state idea is quite recent,
mm,
right?
mhm,
And Iran, as it is now, as a political politically bordered country, is of course it has a root in the old times, but it never was exactly the same entity.
mm,
But what we take as a, well, let's loosely call it Iran, which
mm,
changed a lot during history,
mhm,
shared a lot of content with its neighbors, obviously.
mm,
And part of that was in music, of course.
mm,
And it went on as always, I mean, as it's passed, till
mm,
Safavid era. That would be like 11th century,
mm.
10th, 11th century Islamic calendar, I'm talking.
Yeah.
And so that would be like 16th century Christian calendar
Mm,
onward.
mm,
Till then, you couldn't say that our maqam system or our instruments was distinctly different from what was happening in what is Iraq today, for example, or what is Turkey today, or what is Lebanon today.
mm,
We shared, but it was like a spectrum. So when you went further east in Khorasan, for example,
mm,
which existed then too, you would see dutar
mm,
as a more important instrument versus oud, which was more important in the West.
mhm,
So it worked like a spectrum. It wasn't that the oud was a very important instrument in Iran and then it disappeared. No, even before the
mm,
Safavid came to power, there was a variety. The diversity was quite high, and it differed from region to region. But
mhm,
what we have as the heritage of pre-Safavid era, which includes these brilliant treatises on music by Farabi and Ibn Sina and Maraghi and Safieddin Ormavi, they are all referring to oud as the main instrument, and they
mm,
are explaining all the stuff, all the so-called theoretical stuff,
mm.
on the oud as the mm, kamel instrument,
Yeah.
as the
Mm,
perfect instrument.
mhm,
And the other instruments are always described and analyzed and criticized, even in comparison to the oud.
mhm,
And there is no sign of anything like what we have as santur now in Iran. And there's no sign of anything like tar
mm,
as we have had in the last 200 years in Iran.
mhm,
But what happens is like an earthquake during Safavid times, which Shia comes to power, and then there comes a lot of limitations on music, and a lot of musicians, according to some documents, historical documents, they fled the Safavid Empire, and they either went to India or to Ottoman court.
mm,
And with them, they took parts of the heritage, for example, what we had with Abdul Qadir Maraghi,
mm,
through his sons and his grandsons, traveled to Ottoman court and became the foundations or part of the foundations of what flourished later.
mm,
Anyway, we have a blackout about what happened in the center of this area, which is still Iran, like around Isfahan and Shiraz and Tehran and these areas, which are Farsi speaking areas mainly.
mm,
We don't know anything about what happened in their music till Qajar times.
mm,
Around the mid Qajar, when Nasiruddin Shah is in power, then again we see some signs of music and musicians.
mhm,
And there's no sign of oud. There's no single oud player. We don't hear anyone who knows anything about the oud, actually. Oud
mm,
has suddenly disappeared the scene, and
mm,
tar has taken over. And this was taken for some time. This was taken by a lot of Iranians. Well, there are, of course, a lot of hypotheses about why
mm,
oud disappeared. And some people believe that because the Safavids, or in Safavid times, these nationalistic ideas were supposed to defend borders. They were trying to propagate the like Sunni versus Shia and whatever would go with that.
mhm,
It was happily unsuccessful, I would say, or partly unsuccessful at least. Um, with that, Qanun and oud disappeared from the scene.
mm,
And they were absent for many years. So we can say that it was absent for more than 300 years, till some musicians were interested in the instrument. They fell in love with it, or they just liked it, and they saw it through Egyptian movies, for example, that they were here and there, or through radio stations that were broadcasting music from Arabic countries mainly. It wasn't that much in fashion from Turkey then.
yeah,
And it was first Yusuf Kamusi and then Abdul Wahab Shahidi, who I think Yusuf Kamusi first traveled to Iraq and came back with an oud.
mm,
He bought it there and he learned a bit how to deal with the instrument, but he was only playing in ensembles for radio recordings. We don't have any recordings, as far as I know, from him playing solo. But Abdul Wahab Shahidi also received an oud from an oud maker, Ali Al Awad. He was
mm,
a very well received oud maker,
mm,
who's said to be, I mean, among Iraqis, he was called an Ajam, which means he was probably coming from a background from Iran. Anyway, Abdul Wahab Shahidi had one of his ouds and he was playing it and singing. And because he was a very famous singer, people started to have interest in the oud. Around the same time, or maybe a bit earlier, Mansour Nariman, who was musically trained through singing and setar and tar playing in his family. His father was also a very good singer. Uh, he fell in love with the instrument because of watching Egyptian movies and seeing Muhammad Abdul Wahab and Farid al-Atrash and the others playing it. So he desperately wanted an oud to play, and he found Nariman Abnusi in Tehran and asked him to make one for him. He wanted to see an instrument before trying to build one up close, of course.
Mhm.
And with a lot of begging and arrangements, they managed to borrow the oud, I think, from Yusuf Kamusi once. And Nariman Abnusi managed to make an oud
Mm.
for Mansour Nariman, which was a very good one, and it stayed with him till the end of his life. It sounded very, very beautiful, and most of, as far as I know, all Mansour Nariman's recordings are played on that oud.
Wow.
So for many years, Abdul Wahab Shahidi and Mansour Nariman were playing solo on the radio and then later in television programs on this instrument. And then it started to get attention from people. But
Mm.
still, a lot of people would take it as non-Iranian instruments.
Yeah, but it
Uh,
looks Iranian today.
yeah, this idea of dividing. I mean, saying who comes from where is just
Mm.
an illusion. I mean, we share a lot of background with
Mm.
each other, not just in the region. I mean, we.
Mm.
I think a lot of politicians are making their benefits out of these ideas, so they are. Uh, they are making the how to say they are doing their best
Mm.
to invest in such things, like saying Barbat was originally from Iran because of Barbad, who was pre-Islamic lute player or
Mm.
oud player or whatever you want to call it. And then,
Mm.
so what?
Mm.
Even if we believe that there was a Barbad playing an instrument which was very similar to what we have today and we call it oud, it developed
Yeah.
with all the people in this region and even further in the North Africa and even further in the south of Europe. So uh, what is what is making us decide what is an oud and what is a barbat?
Mm.
The whole thing is, I mean, even if we go to Persian poetry, for example, in Hafiz poetry, you see many samples of using both.
Mm.
Like in one line, he writes Barbat, in the other one, he writes oud. Were there two different instruments then? I doubt.
Mm.
According to the context, because they have different rhythms.
Mm.
He used either this or that. So maybe one of the names are the old names because we have the name of Barbat in Pahlavi in the pre-Islamic texts. So it might have been an older name for the
Yeah.
same.
Mm.
Anyway, I want to say that this nationalist idea can be argued very easily.
Mm.
The thing is, different accents developed and different versions developed
Mm.
during the history of each of the regions. And coming back to our story,
Mm.
these two musicians, Abdul Wahab Shahidi and Mansour Nariman, didn't know Arabic music or
Mm.
Turkish music. What they knew as the content of music was the music they were brought up with.
Yeah.
That we generally call dastgah music, Persian music, or whatever. And
Mm.
they loved the instrument and they wanted to play it.
Mm.
Some of the qualities come with the instrument. Like when you play it, you need some sort of technique. And that we share, of course, with the other oud players.
Mm.
And I remember it might be interesting for you. It was a very enlightening experience for me when I started to play the oud after a
Mm.
couple of months. I went with a friend, she was also learning, to a group of other musicians. And I had my oud with me. We were supposed to practice some other stuff on a recorder flute together, but I had my oud with me. And
Mm.
the other musicians asked me to play a bit.
Mm.
Up to that point, I was used to being asked, "Oh, you play the oud. Do you play Arabic?" And some of those who had access to some satellite channels from Turkey those days would even consider the option of, or maybe Turkish.
Mm.
And when I said none and I was playing Dastgah stuff, they would say, but oud is not Persian. And I was used to that.
Mm.
Fine, I didn't care. That day, I was very surprised that after I played some stuff in Mahur on my oud, the musicians who were trained with Western classical
Mm.
commented that, oh, this is actually a lute. You should play Renaissance stuff on it. And that moment was like a coin drop for me, as they call in
Mm.
Farsi, that I
Mm.
realized that, oh, actually, what people are perceiving and judging
Mm.
is the tone color that they
Mm.
have already associated with some other memories
Yes.
of their own. So those who had memories of the sound of a lute with Renaissance music would think that this instrument matches that kind of music. And those who had memories with, say, Arabic music in general,
Mm.
with that kind of tone color, they would judge it as that. So even before they would see what I was playing as a content,
Mm.
they would have judged me already with the sound, which I'm
Mm.
not saying is totally wrong, but it would be like judging someone from the clothes they were wearing.
Mm.
So if I wear Arabic clothes, will I be Arab? Yes or
Yeah.
no? Yes and no. It's funny. You can ask
It is. Yeah.
more direct questions.
Yeah.
Uh, did I get too far from the topic?
No, no,
Anyway.
you are on the point. Actually, it's the same question for violin. Maybe this will change the context of their associations.
Hmm.
Now the violin talks Arabic, talks Persian. Abul Hassan Sabah has proven,
Absolutely.
he and others, uh, Indian and all other kinds of music languages on the same instrument with no single
Absolutely.
change on it.
Hmm. I agree totally. And
Yeah,
that's why it's an instrument. It's a musical instrument. You are
yeah,
supposed to use the instrument to deliver something. And the
yeah.
content you deliver, of course, will have to follow some qualities and
Mm,
limitations that the instrument is giving you, but still you are bringing in the content, and
mm,
not that you are. I think the whole problem comes from the idea of imitation. Again, we go back to the topic of holiness and sharia and such stuff. In a culture, in a cultural background, that people are used to imitating things without really being originally understanding about the content, they might
yeah.
easily fall into that trap. That if I'm an Iranian and I don't have a deep understanding of, say, Egyptian music,
Hmm.
and I fall in love with oud, what I do is that I take the stuff from, well, say, Muhammad Abdul Wahab, and then I just try to copy him. And
Mm,
that will, of course, end up in a very poor copy, because obviously I don't really have the knowledge and the understanding of the content of that music. It's like me playing the role in a Shakespeare piece of theater.
yes.
Do I understand it? Maybe I manage to a bit if I try very hard. I'm not
Mhm,
saying I can't, but I have to really study it and work on it. Anyway, what Mansour Nariman did,
mhm,
and Abdul Wahab Shahidi didn't, was that Mansour Nariman started teaching people.
mm,
And he managed to bring this instrument into the official curriculum of conservatories, and then later to the universities. And he, of course, put a lot of energy into writing pieces and exercises. And then after, a bit later, with our collaborations, the students also worked with him to write the Dasgah stuff
mm,
that would sit better in a way that would sit better on the oud. And that is all published now, and there are, I don't know how many oud players now in Iran. So it's
mm,
practically revived, and I think we owe it to all these people. But Mansour Nariman, of course, played a very important role.
interesting. One last question about this point. Uh, where do we find this literature or repertoire that was written by
By Mansour Nariman.
by Mansour and you guys?
Yeah, I have talked about them in another interview, which is actually uh, put on a website of a very dear colleague and friend of mine, oudmigrations.com.
Mm,
And the pictures of the books are there. There are three books. One is
mm,
called Shive Barbat Navazi, that is for the
mm,
beginners to start with.
mm,
exercises and getting to know the instrument from the elementary level to the more difficult. Shiva is method,
mm.
and Barbat Nawazi meaning playing the Barbat. Then it was in
Yes.
fact to call it
Mm,
Barbat. Then there's a second book, 42 pieces, 42 قطعه,
mm,
42 pieces for the oud.
mm,
And that is only 42 pieces that either he had improvised on the instrument in one radio broadcast, or he had composed for oud with an ensemble.
mm,
And we worked with him in transcribing the improvisations, and then we
mm,
put them all in a dastgah order, like all the pieces that belong to one dastgah are in a row.
mm,
And we also mentioned the names of important gouches when they happened in a char mizrab, for example, in a piece, so
mm.
that the learner in an intermediate level can follow with
Interesting.
the help of that. And then there is this third, which is radif for the oud,
Mm.
and that presents all the stuff, all the gouches and all the dasgahs in the traditional order, but on the keys and where you can comfortably play it on the oud.
Interesting. That's a great thing you have done. Thank you for
Uh,
that, actually.
I have
Uh,
contributed only a bit to it,
yeah,
but I try to be a part of it to enjoy it as well as
yeah,
use it later.
yeah. Negar, what about the project of Shoknama and
Oh,
Abdul
wow.
Qadir Marari? At least
Mhm.
some
Some
highlights of
over.
that.
Very good. Yeah, I would love to talk about it. I think it's an important event in the recent years on music of Iran, which needs a lot of attention.
Mm,
Um, what we knew, not all of us Iranian musicians, but some of us
mm,
knew from the books, was that Abdul Qadir Maraghi was a very important figure in the whole history of music in that area,
mm,
including Iran.
mm,
And we had heard and read in his books that he refers a lot to his compositions. By the way, I would like to take this chance and
mm,
uh, make a comment on something a lot of people say. There is this, I don't know who invented this idea, but there is this tendency to put practice against theory,
mm,
saying that theory is just a nerd thing for people who have pen and paper, blah, blah,
mm,
and music is happening in practice, really.
mm.
I think it can happen, but that's a disease. The
Yeah.
real stuff only happens when you connect these two. And Abdul Qadir Maraghi was one of those. He was a theoretician and a musician composer.
Mm,
He says that a lot in his books. Safiuddin Ormavi was the same. They both were oud players, and they were invited to courts of who and who during their lifetimes because of their compositions and their knowledge both. I mean, they were invited to come to who as Amir or who as a king or whatever, because they were good musicians. They knew a lot and they composed beautiful
and
music.
we have seen this in this interview too.
Yes, and
Mm,
we knew we had evidence in Abdul Qadir's books, written by he himself, that he had composed a lot of pieces,
mhm,
but we didn't have any access to any of such compositions.
mm,
The good thing about Abdul Qadir, or the thing that made it easier for us, was that his books were originally written in Farsi,
mhm.
in comparison to Safiuddin Ormavi, who wrote in Arabic.
Yeah,
Of course, that the official language for writing important stuff in those times were Arabic,
yeah.
the same as writing in Latin for Newton in Europe, for example.
Mm,
So Abdul Qadir was the very first important figure, maybe the first and almost the last, who wrote in Persian, in Farsi.
mhm,
So we had read his books and we knew that there were a lot of his compositions, but we didn't have access. And then Mohammad Reza Darwishi, a musicologist and a musician, was obsessed with finding them.
mm,
And after many years, he finally started a serious project of collecting whatever was was written or transcribed under the name of Abdulqadir Maraghi in a movement that happened around the end of 19th century in Turkey
Mm-hmm.
under the direction of Rauf Yekta,
Mm.
the very well-known musician.
Yeah.
And among them were 32 pieces that were said was compositions of Abdulqadir Maraghi. There were no question marks, no doubts
Mm.
there. I mean, they had talked about them that these are Abdul Qadir Maraghi with no doubt.
Mm.
Of course, we can doubt how
Mm.
much change has happened, but they were stored under his name, the same as we have a collection of rubaiyat, for example, we call they are khayyams. We call
Yes.
rubaiyat khayyam. We don't say, but we don't know if they really were done by khayyam. And there are rumors that not all of them
Yeah.
were done by khayyam. But
Mm.
anyway, these were the compositions that were listed under the name of Abdul Qadir. Mohammad Reza Darwishi collected them from archives here and there. Some of them, a few, maybe a handful, were still played. The most famous one is this one in Rast that آمد نسیم صبحانم درنم. And that's very famous. That is performed almost everywhere.
Yeah.
But there were some which were not performed for centuries.
Mm-hmm.
And Darwishi brought them. He made a group of musicians who were up to the task. I
Mm-hmm.
was among the team, and we were aimed to play the repertoire for recording them. Most of them had Farsi words on them,
Mm-hmm.
the poetry were Persian. Some of them had even verses from Hafiz.
Mm.
And the other part that we had to take into account in the project was to decide what tuning we need to take to
Mm-hmm.
play them. So we wanted, for me, part of the importance of this project was to make connection between the books that we had from 600 years ago and some sound that
Mm-hmm.
I could play on the same instrument that Abdul Qadir was playing, or rather the same instrument, more or less the same instrument.
Yeah.
And that was a revelation. I mean, when we played them, and I realized that, wow, this is how the ajnas and maqam could be interpreted into melodies that would sit on this instrument in a certain way. Uh, I knew from theory what intervals to look for. So the next step would be how to check them on the notations. How were they reflected in the notations? So I had to check the rather modern theory of symbols the Turks used for transcribing them. And that was easy. That was clearly used. I mean, I could almost immediately make the connection of what symbol is for what tuning. And according to that, we draw a map for the intervals we needed. The Qanun player tuned according to that. And the other instruments only followed. And we were a group of musicians of a robab, an oud, two alto kamanches, one chahartar, we called it. It was a tambour, but with four instruments, which was more similar or closer to what we could find in the Abdul Qadir manuscripts, and a ney, plus a daire or a bendir, as the Turks call it. And we performed the pieces, we recorded them, and then Humayun Shajarian sang on them. And the final product came out as an album. We called it Shoghname, which is also the name of one of the pieces. It means literally the letter of enthusiasm. And it has, we managed to do only 24 pieces. I mean, we couldn't find the other. I mean, we couldn't complete the whole list of 32 pieces that were on the list. We couldn't find all of them through the archives. So 24 of them were retrieved. We played them, recorded them, and it's released under the name of Shohname.
Wow, this is very impressive, really. I wish people pay attention to such a magnificent project and really learn from this experience.
Well,
Yeah,
instead, some of the very traditionalist Nastgah people
mm.
resisted to that too. They
For
thought
sure.
they thought we were telling them that you are not old enough, and we have found an older version, and you are expired.
mm,
but that was not the reason, that was not the aim of the whole project. We were
mm,
doing, I mean, it's like finding something from your past.
mm,
It doesn't take away the value from what you are for the last
mm,
200 years, but you have found something that will give a voice to something that was on a book before.
mm,
So we also had some resistance there,
mm.
but well,
Yeah, interesting. This comes, I think, with a documentary, right?
yes, there is a documentary that a fabulous filmmaker, Mojtaba Mir Tahmasp, took the trouble to make, because our project took quite some time, from the very start that Darwishi started to collect the pieces till we finished and released the album, took 6 years actually.
Mm,
And the name Mir Tahmasp has chosen for the documentary is 6 centuries, 6 years,
mm,
referring to the 600 years of being away from that
mm.
music culture, and the 6 years that the project took.
So it took you 6 years to come to bring that 16th century time here.
Somehow, yeah,
Yeah,
from the beginning of the project to the date that we managed to release it.
interesting, interesting. Nigar, I think I took a lot of your time. It's really interesting
Not at
to
all.
continue this discussion. Let's conclude it with some selections of your music making, with some commentary about these selections.
Yeah, I would be happy to.
Mm,
Maybe because the one I talked about before was my very personal expression in the maqam world, and with that ingredient, maybe I should take the opposite here
mm,
and go for another example, which is different, and that would be where I. Are you familiar with the concept of istiqbal in poetry?
mm,
Istiqbal in poetry, in Persian poetry, is said um, when you use only one misra, only one half verse of some other poet's work,
mhm.
and do another piece of poetry on that.
Ah, okay. Yeah, I
So you
understand.
write your own poetry, but you are using pieces of someone else,
Mm,
some other poet, which you of
mm,
course love and respect.
yeah.
And I have done that work as an istiqbal
Mm,
to some older stuff in Persian Dastgah,
mm,
traditional stuff. And one of them that I rather recently recorded is in Segah,
mhm,
one of my very favorite dastgahs in Persian music.
mm,
And there I used two things mainly.
mm,
One is a Masnavi, that's Shajarian, Muhammad Reza Shajarian, the Ustad of very recent, I mean, the whole last 40 years
mm,
of Persian dastgah music. He was the singer of it.
mm,
In an album of his, Aseman Ishq, it's called, the Skies of Love,
mm,
or Heavens of Love. He has sung a Masnavi. Masnavi is originally a format in poetry, but in music we also have it.
mm,
When you have verses in two parts that are like call and response to each other,
mm,
and it has a certain rhythm,
mm,
a rather fluid rhythm.
mm,
But the most important, the most well-known piece of Masnavi is actually by Maulana Jalaleddin Rumi.
mhm,
بشنو از نی چون حکایت میکند. Everybody knows that Masnavi, Ma'navi they call it.
mm,
That rhythm, dam daram bam bam baram bam bam baram, is very famous, and most of the Masnavi music pieces are also in that. And Shajarian has one of those in Segar that
mm,
starts with زهی در کوی عشقت مسکن دل, and that's one of my favorites. So
mhm,
I use that in my composition. And there's another piece of Segar, which is a tasnif.
mm,
Tasnif is a vocal piece which is metered.
mm.
And it was a composition of Amir Jahid, but sung by Qamarul Muluk Waziri, another uh, shining
Yeah.
figure in the Persian
mm,
music, a brilliant and very courageous singer, I would say.
mm,
Um, she sang it so beautifully.
mm,
That is called Aman az in Dil.
mm,
That's well, you have to listen to the original of that, of course.
mm,
And I also used melodies of that and put into the context of this semi-composition, semi-improvised piece
mm,
of mine. One of the things I love and I usually try to do is that I half compose something in the sense that I think of a structure
mm,
for the whole piece. And I also think of some highlighted moments of where I want to get to.
mm,
But during the performance, I let myself develop it,
mm,
either from one note towards that highlighted point, or start with that point, with that theme or that motive, and develop upon that.
mm,
And in this also, which I called in Segah,
mm,
uh, you can take it as English in meaning in a mode, in the
mm,
mode of Segah, or in Farsi, in is referring to this.
mm.
So you can translate it as this Segah,
Wow.
which to me means the Segah I love.
Yeah, yeah.
And I've put it in a piece of three parts. The
Mm,
first part is more a tribute to that Masnavi by Shajarian. The second part is referring to this tasnif that I love with Qamar singing. And the last part is a piece of mine, which I had already also published a version in my first album.
mm,
And that is the more moving part as a last movement,
mm.
you would call it. And the whole piece I've called Insega.
Interesting. We'll listen to it then.
Good, wonderful, thank you.
Negar, what about another selection of an example of your work?
I'm of two minds which one to pick.
You can pick both. Just introduce. And we said we'll choose three. Now we can choose four.
Yeah, absolutely. The reason I stopped for a moment now is what I had thought of doing to present and comment about is something I think musically is important. I
Hmm,
mean, is a very good sample of what I thought would express as a modern person
hmm,
working with the old material to
hmm,
express how they feel. That's a song I have already uploaded on my SoundCloud, and it's called Neast.
mhm,
and my brother Bobak has sung. The vocals are his. And there's another project also which I worked as a composer in, and that is originally an audiobook.
Mm,
Somebody is reading the material from a very old text, one of the very old Sufi texts we have
mm,
about love,
mm.
in the sense of not personal. I mean, not between human beings, but as love means in mysticism.
Yeah.
Mysticism. And I was hired. I was commissioned to compose music for that, and I have used ney, oud, and bendir, the daira,
Mm,
to do 3 lines of short, very short compositions to go in between the texts.
mhm,
But I also went for um, some concepts
mm.
with images I had in mind when I read the text. Like, shall I talk about it in details?
Yeah, please.
Okay. Um, in the text, the writer is by the way, the writer is Ahmad Ghazali.
Mhm,
It's not the Sharia guy, but a Sufi guy,
mm,
but they share the name.
mm,
Um, the Sharia guy is Muhammad Ghazali. This is Ahmad Ghazali.
mhm,
He was a great dervish, a Sufi, and he seems, or he's said to be the first guy who wrote about um, love as a triangle of a lover, which is the human being in this context, a beloved, which is the holy or the god or whatever you want to name it,
mm,
and a third thing, which is the love itself.
mm, mm,
And he is dealing with this as 3 different elements.
mhm,
So I saw this in my imagination. I saw this as 3 figures
mm,
sitting in 3 different corners of a Sufi place,
mm,
of what we call khanegah,
mhm.
or a holy place where people can pray or do their rituals.
Yeah,
But every one of these figures is sitting in a corner doing their own prayer, or what we call suluk,
yeah.
their way, their path
Mhm,
to be enlightened.
mhm,
So one was the oud, one was the ney, and the other one in my music composition was reflected in the rhythm section. Of course,
mhm,
sometimes I used a combination
mm,
of multiplied lines of, like,
mm,
the percussion could be daire with tombak, or the ney could be 2 lines at the same time, because I also personally believe that the person in seek in pursuit of that kind of enlightenment
mm,
has different sides that
mm.
are speaking.
Interesting.
And for the content, I still used the my beloved Dastgah Segah,
Mhm,
but in different areas of that Dastgah. In Segah, we have a maqam as an opening mode, which we call Daramad.
mhm,
There's another one which is Zabul, it's 3 notes higher than Daramad, and there's another one which is Mukhalif,
mhm,
and that goes around the higher. I mean, if you take the Daramad in between, let's say G and B,
mm.
or Sol and C,
Yeah,
Mukhalif will go on around the higher Sol,
yeah. Higher register. Yeah.
higher register, yes.
Mhm,
And here I combined the lines, so you can hear the the ney playing something in Mukhalif
mm,
while the oud is in Daramat. Or
mm,
sometimes they start somewhere together around Zabul, which is in the middle,
mm,
and then the other one of them goes to Mukhalif and the other one goes down to Daramat. Or sometimes they both start in Mukhalif and go down to Daramat. But they are very short melodies, because the aim was to put these pieces in between the recorded speech,
mhm,
where the person was reciting the text, the prose.
mm,
And I love that work as a going back to the old times
mm,
with an imagery of as if I was dreaming that.
mm,
You know, it's the sound over my head while I was dreaming of that Khanaqah or whatever the place was,
mm,
seeing three people or maybe three entities,
mm,
however you want to see that triangle of love, lover, and the beloved, or three Sufis
mm.
in different spots of their path to the uh, holy above or beyond, or whatever you want to name it.
Interesting. What's the name of this piece, Negar?
The piece, unfortunately or fortunately, doesn't have a name because, well, it's not just one piece. That's
Mm,
the point.
mhm,
And I have to look up for the, just if you just give me a second, I will find the name of the album, which I have forgotten because it's the name of, there was a series of these audiobooks being published. They
mm,
called it Ganj Hikmat, the treasure of Hikmah.
mhm,
And this one was called Eivan Jan. That was also taken from the prose, the
mm,
books that they were reciting.
mm,
And the music doesn't have a separate name, unfortunately. I haven't named it. I was actually thinking or dreaming of publishing it as an album later,
mm.
but I never did that. It's just sitting there in between the speech parts.
We'll listen to it then.
Lovely.
عشق خود نوعی از سکر است که کمال او عاشق را از دیدن و ادراک کمال معشوق مانع است، زیرا که عشق سکری است در آلت ادراک و مانع است از کمال ادراک، اگرچه سری لطیف است ورای این، و آن است که چون حقیقت ذات عاشق به ادراک حقیقت ذات معشوق مشغول است، پروای اثبات صفات چون بود از روی تمییز، و اگر ادراک بود پروای ادراک نبود. العجز عن درک الادراک ادراک این بود، و این از عجایب الاسرار است و اندر این معنا گفته است: عمری است که با منی نگارا، وقت غم و وقت شادمانی، والله که هنوز عاجزم من که از خوبی تو دهم نشانی. خودپسند نمی باید بود، خدا پسند باید شد. اگر تو بر خود پوشیده ای، بر وی پوشیده نیستی. سر این که عشق هرگز تمام روی به کس ننماید آن است که او مرغ ازل است. اینجا که آمده است مسافر ابد آمده است. اینجا روی به دیده حدثان ننماید که نه هر خانه آشیان او را شاید، که آشیان از جلالت ازل داشته است. گاه گاه با ازل پرد و در نقاب پرده جلال و تعزز خود شود و هرگز روی جمال به کمال به دیده علم ننموده است و ننماید. برای این سر اگر وقتی نقطه امانت وی را بیند، آن وقت بود که از علایق و عوایق اینجایی وارهد و از پندار علم و هندسه وهم و فیلسوفی خیال و جاسوسی حواس باز رهد. بیار آنکه دل دوستان به هم کشدا، نهنگوار غمان از دلم به دم کشدا. چو تیغ باده برآهنجم از نیام قدح، زمانه باید که از پیش من ستم کشدا. بیار پور مغان را بده به پیر مغان، که روستم را هم رخش روستم کشدا. که ایشان هر دو آنجایند نه اینجایی. علم بی عمل دیوانگی است و عمل بی علم بیگانگی. عافیت در تنهایی است و سلامت در خاموشی.
And how about Neist?
That's another aspect of this concept of mine, to putting the old stuff, the old heritage, into my personal expression as a person living in modern times. It's a tasnif in a sense that it's a metered vocal piece.
Mhm.
But what I have done there is that I have 3 lines of oud repeating a riff-like passage all through the piece.
Mhm.
But they come from 3 different dasgahs. One line is in Shur, one line is in what we call Homayun, and the other one is in Bayat Turk, or Bayat Turk.
Yeah.
And they would sound quite different, of course, but I had managed to put the layers in a way that if you have a very traditional ear, you might feel a bit like, this sounds a bit weird.
Mhm.
But what I wanted to do with it, again, I had an image about it. I saw that creation of space that we were talking about previously, as a sense of designing a space with elements,
Yeah.
similar to what an architect does. I wanted to create a space with what you can see on stage as a theater piece, where forces are creating a background fighting, while in the foreground you see only one person speaking, and that person speaking is a singer. The singer is singing some lines from Hafiz. جز آستان تو هم در جهان پناهی نیست. It means I have no other refuge than your Astan. Astan is usually referred to the first phase, the doorstep, as it were, of a very high person. جز آستان تو هم در جهان پناهی نیست is something that somebody is saying to a person he loves, in a sense that I'm looking for support here. I have no other hope.
Yeah.
سر مرا به جز این در حواله‌گاهی نیست. I can't put my head anywhere else but this doorstep. That is the beginning of the verse. But in the next lines come lines which are actually talking about a very proud person but in a good sense, like a human which will not bow to the evil. And that created, in my mind, created a kind of dialogue between this state of asking for refuge.
Yes.
Like, I need to take refuge to some higher power, but at the same time, I have some power inside that I will not bow to anything other than a very good thing, not a person. And that kind of conversation created for me two parts of the verse in most lines. The first part is the needy part, which is happening either in Bidad of Humayun or the Humayun Daramad itself, which sounds a bit like unhappy, at least, or not content, being worried, being in a state of opposition to something. I mean, in different lines, you can find different expressions. But the lower one is content, which is in Bayat Turk. And the singer is singing them, switching between this to that.
Interesting.
You will hear it, of course, when by the way, my brother Babak took the trouble to sing it. It wasn't easy. While at the same time, the 3 lines of Oud plus Ebendir is playing a game of presence and absence. I mean, whatever they are playing is repeating, but I have made a hollow space here and there in their lines. So sometimes you hear the Bayat Turk line more pronounced, sometimes you hear the Humayun line more pronounced and more obvious. And there comes some spots of Kamanche, which for me was the manifestation of the evil, but being playful. So it's a theatrical piece for me of a modern setting of the fight again, as you see.
Amazing.
It would be another side of the coin to the dead wind.
Amazing. Let's listen to it.
جز آستان تو در جهان پناهی نیست، سر مرا به جز این در حوالگاهی نیست. عدو چو تیغ کشد من سپر بیندازم، که تیر ما به جزت ناله ای و آیی نیست. زمانه بزند آتشم به خرمنو بگو بسوز که بر من به برگ خواهی نیست. عقاب جو گشاده است باد بر همه شهر کمان گوش نشینی و تیر آهی نیست. عنان کشیده رو پادشاه کشور هست که نیست بر سر راهی که داد خواهی نیست.
Dr. Negar, really, I really enjoyed this conversation. This can go forever, but
Hopefully
let's
not.
let's go back to an early question. We started with biography. Let's end it with your name meaning.
I thought you wanted to end it with dying because
No,
we started with
no, we already have the dead wind already finished.
certainly.
Yeah.
Well, my first name Negar
Mm.
is a very lovely name. I should thank my mother for choosing it. It comes from Persian poetry, obviously.
Mm.
It has originally two meanings. One is the beloved woman, and the second meaning is a portrait,
Mm.
like Naksh. When
Uh-huh.
they painted the face of a beautiful woman who
Mm.
was supposed to be the beloved of whoever commissioned the painting, they would call that Enegar. So
Mm.
it's either the picture or the person of the beloved.
Interesting. And how can our listeners and viewers approach your work and albums and whatever projects?
I'm rebuilding my website.
Mm.
Hopefully soon I will put all the necessary links to my works there. For now, it's there, the website negarbouban.com, Bouban with Bouban, and Negar is Negar. So negarbouban.com is there already, but it's not complete yet. I will try to put all the stuff, but you can also find my stuff on SoundCloud of my own and YouTube channel under the same name.
Interesting. Negar, thank you very much again, and we'll meet soon for other great discussions.
Thank you very much for inviting me. I also enjoyed sharing my ideas. I hope that people find it interesting to think about, or they feel as if they can do more with their own stuff. Looking forward to feedback, actually.
I am sure.
Hopefully.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Till next time.